Hello everyone, my name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic day. I hope that everyone is safe, that you and your family and your friends are safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. As you can see, there is a ton of stuff that is happening throughout the globe today, especially when it comes to the country of Ukraine. And as you can see, most of the news tonight does focus on those events and what is happening in the countries around it. So there is a lot of stuff obviously happening when it comes to global crises. A lot of stuff is happening, whether you're talking about war and conflict, or you're talking about your things like natural disasters, climate change, what have you. So the whole point of this channel is not just to inform you as an individual on what's happening throughout the world, but also to give you a chance to give back, because that's the whole point of this channel. That's our motto here. That's our mission statement, is to be the news that gives back. And the way that we're able to do that is through you guys. So the whole point of this is to be able to give back to people that are affected directly by these situations. And the way that we do that is, for now, right there in the video description. If you go down to the video description, you're going to see a ton of different organizations there. And all of them we have gone through and vetted, and most of them have been submitted by you guys as the community. Please keep those things coming. We do want more links. We want to cover every inch of the planet that we can and help people all over the world that are affected by these multitude of crises. So please get in touch with the staff member. Our different links are for our channel, and all of our Discords and our website and everything are down there as well. Get in touch with the staff member. Send us a link to one of those organizations and a little bit about what they do, and we'd love to get that added to the list. 80% or more of all the donations that the organizations do receive end up going directly to their programs. We have specifically gone through and opted out anything that does not meet that criteria, such as some of the big name organizations that you may be familiar with, including the Red Cross. But 80% or more of all the donations that these organizations do receive go to their programs, and meaning they go directly to helping people, as opposed to paying for things like administration's costs and salaries. So thank you very much for supporting those organizations. And this is the reason why here at the New News we don't believe in profiting off of people's misery. The whole point of this is to be 100% charity driven. So we don't do any kind of merchandising. We don't do any kind of monetization. We're not doing any kind of super chats. 100% purely based off for different organizations and helping people throughout the world. That is the goal. So if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. I definitely feel you there. Then please go ahead and, if you can, help us grow our impact. The more people that come here and watch the news, of course, the more people that become informed, but overall, the more people that can actually, go through and donate and help, and overall, the more good we can put back into the world, considering some of these very dark situations that we have ongoing. Now, as we get ready to roll into the news here, please feel free to ask questions if you're joining us live, or make comments. I am watching the live chat, and I will be reading through the comments and different things that are being said on the live chat, and I will address them throughout the stream wherever they are best interjected, at least as I feel. To give you a little bit of background on myself and me being able to answer some of these questions for you, unfortunately, a lot of the stuff happening is to deal with conflict. I served in the Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020. I served as an O-352 anti-tank missileman, meaning I used the Javelin anti-tank missile as well as the TOW missile from the M41A7 Sabre system. I served with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, where I did 2 tours to the Middle East. My first tour was between October of 2017, March of 2018, where I spent 4.5 months in the country of Syria as part of Operation Inherent Resolve in direct support of Special Operations Forces and providing security to them. My second deployment, I spent a total of 6 months, was between October of 2019 and March of 2020. I went overseas to Kuwait, where I was attached to the Crisis Response Company. There, I was in charge of the Javelin anti-tank team. From there, I was one of the 100 Marines that deployed to the Baghdad Embassy complex on New Year's of 2020, when it was overrun by about 4,000 protesters and members of Katiib Hezbollah, which is a popular mobilization force. From there, I oversaw all anti-armor operations over the entire Baghdad Embassy complex, including while we were there for the assassination of General Qassam al-Soleimani. After that, I went to Saudi Arabia, where I trained Saudi Arabian Marines in order to prepare them for deployment as part of the Saudi coalition to Yemen, fighting the Houthi rebels. All in all, I am a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armored doctrine. I am a fully cross-trained machine gunner, a fully cross-trained rifleman, a partially cross-trained radio operator, and a combat lifesaver or CLS certified Marine, meaning I've received additional medical training on top of what is normally provided. Outside of that scope, I also work in logistics, meaning I have extensively worked with getting things shipped to and fro, both transcontinental and internationally. So I have a very wide range of understanding as to what's going on logistically as well, and some of the difficulties in that. Outside of those topics, and what I am an expert in, or am very well voiced in, I do try to remain well voiced and well rounded in a multitude of topics, including geopolitics, human geography, history, paleontology, archaeology, and many, many other topics that I just find interest in. However, I will never claim to be an expert in any of these. And subject matter expert or not, it doesn't matter, because the most important thing is that you as the viewer, if you have an interest in these topics, please don't take it at face value, and I please encourage you to always do your own research. If you would like a starting point, we provide the map for you guys. I provided it on the Discord tonight, but you can always find them freely available before every single stream, so you can follow along. Or if you want to go back and click through the links yourselves, then they are provided on our website, which is also linked in the description under our works, Daily Maps 2022, in the section under December now, as we have rolled into that month. Another note is that this will be the last stream before I do go on vacation. That is the last tidbit here. This will be the last stream before I go on vacation. So up until we will come back on Wednesday. Oh geez, it will be Wednesday the 14th will be the next live stream that we will be doing after this. So I apologize for those that have been waiting, but we'll have a recap of all the major things that happened while I was gone and get us all up to speed onto that date. I see that Mark Jackson from New Zealand has joined us. Hello and welcome. It's always happy to see new faces. I'm always happy to see new people joining in, and I hope that I will be able to answer some of your questions to the best of my ability. But with that, we immediately dive into the news and everything that is happening, of course, starting with our special report from Ukraine, which is where the vast majority of the news is coming from. So the first thing we start off with is actually over here up in, of course, the capital of Kyiv, where we have several major developments coming out. The first one is coming from the 3rd, and this is from the state. The state ended up awarding the Ukrainian defenders, and so what we end up seeing is this is from the Ukrainian defenders that were released from Russian captivity. Oh no, did I miss Army Commander Conscriptovich? Okay, yes. I will get to that here in a minute, Nuclear. The state awarded Ukrainian defenders present. So these are the prisoners of war which were released back to Ukraine, not just but a few days ago. And President Zelensky himself awarded state honors to all of them after they were officially released. We can see him presenting those awards there in Kyiv. So just kind of a fantastic moment there. Now, an ongoing joke here on the channel is Nuclear's Army Commander Conscriptovich. No relation to Private Conscriptovich that followed our official Twitter. But so every day, so he came to us as a private, and the ongoing joke is he continued to get promoted. So we had Private Conscriptovich. Now we're up to Army Commander Conscriptovich from Nuclear, who says, quote, "There is no panic, there is no panic, there is no panic, there is no panic, there is no panic." Yes, that sounds like the official Kremlin rhetoric to a T. However, not everything is all fun and games, as we learned today. Now, something that we added to our Discord and we're working in correlation with is actually we have a new Discord bot. I got in touch with an individual named Nish, thanks to one of our volunteer mods, who is also working with him, who also runs a very large Discord that has a lot of Ukrainians in it. And it gives us very real-time, up-to-date information with different information regarding all of the air raid sirens that are currently going on. And we have added that in order to provide that to the people that are on our Discord. We do know that we have Ukrainians on there. And I'll actually pull it up over here. So this is our Discord here. And this is, as you can see, we get these constant air raid sirens alerts. It'll also tell you if when the incidents are pretty bad to get texting alerts. So that way, if the internet does go down, you can still receive information. And a whole host of other things. It'll tell you where different shelters are and different incoming updates regarding this. It'll also give the all clear signals. It's all generated on there. And so as we came in today, we saw just a huge number of alerts coming from all throughout the day as a huge number of missiles were fired. Reports right now are 70, and that could be more. I've heard upwards of over 100 missiles at this point, as the numbers are still coming in to be tallied. The interesting fact is that some of these missiles included missiles that were given to Russia during exactly 28 years ago with the signing of the Budapest Memorandum, which actually occurred today on this day in history. Budapest Memorandum of 1994 meant that Ukraine would give up its entire nuclear arm to Russia with guarantees of its independence and territorial integrity and sovereignty by the Russian Federation, and would be backed militarily by any aggressive nation which would try to do harm, and those weapons would not ever be used against Ukraine. Once again, solidifying the fact that Russia will not confirm any of, or will never uphold any of its treaties, and that their word means nothing. And so that's kind of what we see here. So far, missiles reportedly targeted energy infrastructure in Kyiv, Odessa, and Vinnytsia. President Zelensky reported that 4 people had so far been killed. The metro stations in Kyiv were filled with people to take shelter from the shellings, as we saw from Svitlanka, which is the thumbnail photo of the night. It was taken today, it was taken today inside of the Kyiv metro tunnels by a passerby of a Ukrainian soldier holding a small child, kind of rocking them to sleep in the middle of these bombardments. You can see here for the defense from the official Twitter of the Department of Defense of Ukraine, or the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Missile Monday. They said that more than 60 were shot down with 70-plus missiles launched. The aggressor mission failed. Aggressor's future as a terrorist state was sealed. Coming from the official Twitter of the Ministry of Defense. The Kiev Independent, which is located there, stated that they continued working while the shelling was ongoing, and they did release several sets of photos from inside the metro tunnels while the shelling was ongoing. Once again, very crowded as everyone is moving there and is trying to seek shelter. Most of these metro stations, especially inside of areas that were former Soviet Union, including major metallurgy plants too, including the Azovstal, were built with extensive nuclear-capable bunkers that were meant to be able to save a large population in the event of a nuclear war between the two great superpowers of the Cold War. So this is from Anton Gerashenko and his official Twitter, and this is inside of the metro tunnels today during the shelling. As you can see, very, very crowded. Lots and lots of people were rushing to the subway for shelter. More photos coming out, of course. But at this point in the war, this has happened so many times. For a lot of people, this is relatively daily life. This is a normal day in living in Ukraine. And you can see that is the thumbnail photo. Once again, it's taken by Svitlanka and was posted on her Twitter. It's been shared numerous times. As you can see, we're, of course, sharing it. Many media sites are sharing it, too. Very powerful image. Very powerful image. Meanwhile, even though that there are air raid sirens and everything, that this man is next to a bunch of destroyed buildings which were previously struck by Russia using Shahed 131s and also missile strikes, doesn't seem to faze him at this point. Some people, and this is something I can attest to, having been shelled for a significant period of time, the the thing is that you get used to it, whether it's to your detriment or not. You could call it complacency, which does kill. But there comes a point in which you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? And if it's my time to go, it's my time to go. Some people do take on that ideology, and this is why we still see people out and about, despite the active air raids that were happening at the time. But it doesn't seem to bother this musician, who just continued to play despite everything going on around him. So, yes, that is something I can attest to. You do get kind of complacent in that fact of sometimes you stop rolling out of bed for it. There comes a point where you just stop rolling out of bed for that. Delta Aviation 23 said this strike was supposed to be bigger, but some aircraft were damaged on the ground. That is what we have heard. So to put it into perspective, this is not, even though this could be seen as there were provocations by Ukraine that caused this, it has been rumored for some significant amount of time that there was going to be a very, very large strike on Ukraine from multiple different triads of the Russian military. This is something that was already suspected, and the positioning and the amount of missiles suggests that these troops are already in place, and that this was not an order given in retribution for something that had happened. This was something that was already pre-planned. And in the wide overreaching arch of these strikes, the amount of them really seems to illustrate that. You don't see you don't move 70 different systems to fire large missiles overnight. That's just not something that happens. No matter how big your military is, it is extremely difficult logistical feat. Unfortunately, we also get a casualty update. This is the official one from the UN, Human Rights Council, and we see the updates regarding civilian casualties. According to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, recorded 688 civilian casualties in Ukraine in November of 2022. 162 were killed, 51 men, 35 women, 3 girls, 5 boys, as well as 3 children and 65 adults whose gender is not yet known, and 526 injured, 135 men, 86 women, 9 girls, 15 boys, as well as 8 children and 273 adults whose gender is once again yet unknown. From February 24th, at the start of the invasion, to the December the 4th, the OHCHR recorded 17,181 civilian casualties so far in Ukraine, with 6,702 being killed and 10,479 having been injured. And that, once again, is coming from the UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights. However, from Ukraine itself, this is coming from Yevgeny Yenin, who is the first Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, has also provided a casualty update to go along with that. He said, quote, "Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, Russian occupiers have killed 9,400 and injured 6,800 Ukrainian citizens. Moreover, due to Russian shellings, 461 Ukrainian children were killed," and that number actually jumped over 20 since the previous 24 hours. Quite a significant number. These estimates include only what is verifiable, as it is impossible to verify any kind of information that is coming out of the occupied areas, where in Mariupol alone is suspected that tens of thousands of people have died, with mass graves via satellite imagery such as Maxar being identified, suggesting that that number could be very much higher. And that is the caveat with the UN inside of Ukraine, which does provide these casualty updates and does very clearly state in every single update they provide that the casualty numbers are likely much higher indeed. So even the United Nations is also understanding the fact that this information is only relative to what is happening inside of Ukrainian-held territory, as there is no information and no help going into those areas occupied. We move over and into the Kharkiv region, where you really get a sense as to just how bad this war is. This war has been they have talked about how this war is compared to a number of different conflicts throughout history. The invasion of Iraq in some ways. I've seen it proposed. I have others seen it talked about World War II. And personally, to me, this war resembles much more of World War I. It's much more akin with World War I when you can see the size and scope and the type of battlefield conditions that are being faced here. You're talking about static defensive trench lines, very similar in their construction to that of World War I trench lines, especially from the Western Allied powers. And you're also seeing a huge number of artillery pieces coming into play and supporting indirect fires, littering the landscape and making many of these battlefields and these open fields and plains of Ukraine, originally meant for being the breadbasket of Europe and the world, now looking much more like the fields of the Somme and of Passchendaele Ridge and of Verdun. And to just give you a sense of how much artillery fire is being launched at this Ukrainian cities, this is the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv. This is the shell graveyard. This is the rockets and shells and artillery that had been fired at the city of Kharkiv, all collected into one place as they are cleaning up. And this is one of a multitude of different locations where munitions are being stored. And these are all spent. These are all destroyed. And you can see just how much there is. It is insane. It is incomprehensible. And the variety of the shells is insane to think about as well. Many of them being 152 millimeter shells, BM-21 Grad 122 millimeter Katyusha rockets. Many of them being much, also Aragon rockets, which I believe are 203 millimeter. You see S-300 missiles in here. You see ballistic missile pieces. You see all sorts of different items that have been launched at Ukrainian cities. And these, for the vast majority of these weapon systems, they're not guided. These are weapon systems which are dumb fire. They're unguided. They're dumb munitions, which means that, for the most part, the BM-21 Grad, standing for hail in Russian, best really explains the Russian mindset and doctrine into artillery usage. The Grad system conducts what's called saturation bombardment, and this is where it fires 40 round salvos of 122 millimeter Katyusha rockets, usually high explosive rounds, but also high explosive dual purpose. And it can also launch incendiary shells. This is the 9S-22Ms that we have shown here on the channel innumerable amounts of times. Bakhmut alone, we've covered it 6. And we've seen here, what happens is it just covers a general area. It will cover, from this road to this road, I want it leveled and filled with explosive power. It is not something that is discriminatory, and based off of the Additional Protocol 1 of the 1949 Geneva Conventions, which was adopted in 1977, such indiscriminate fires are actually prohibited by the Geneva Conventions, and therefore they constitute a war crime. According to the 1993 Rodin Statute, which establishes the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, by using indiscriminate fires such as these, and doing it in a systematic fashion, as we have seen with Kharkiv, with Bakhmut, we've seen it with innumerable settlements throughout Ukraine. You can see it with Soledar, Mariupol. Then that becomes systematic, in which case it is a crime against humanity. And it's hard to look at these shells, which have been fired at civilians. Ultimately, majority of these were fired at civilians, and this is just, like I said, one section of this yard, and it's just one pile. As you can see, there are many. It really puts into scale just how much has been fired. And this is what has been found. This is what is still, this number continues to grow significantly on the daily. The internal Ministry of Internal Affairs records finding hundreds of additional unexploded shells every single day. Every single day. Upwards of over 1,000 shells in a single day. And that is just in fractions of miles. I mean, that's not even talking about full miles. You're talking about, in many cases, just a quarter of a square mile of land being covered, and being and finding munitions in it. We come down here, and this is where we start to roll into the Donbass and really the meat and potatoes of the conflict. This is where the main parts of combat are taking off. This is where the main fighting is happening. This is where it is most kinetic. And we start up here. This is in the village of Novosibirsk. Novoselivske. Which is the Luhansk Oblast. Now, the last stream we showed Russian forces had actually entered into this area, which we had previously identified as having been successfully liberated by Ukrainian forces. At this point, the Russians appear to have pushed them out. We now once again seeing fighting continuing in this village, so we have now listed this as contested. Something about our map is, while it is not something what we consider an accurate representation, we do it based off of the information that we find available on the through our sources, and that is when we update it. At this point, we are now stating that this village is contested, as the footage shows both sides entering the village, which is not exceptionally large, and also shows them doing so relatively freely or while in combat. And we can see some of this very fierce fighting that's ongoing here. This is Ukrainian forces as they are pushing. This is the village of Novosibirsk. Over the last about 72 hours as Ukrainian forces continue the fight here in the Luhansk. We can see they are pushing up. This is roughly what I would consider probably a rifle squad size. It's more of it's a couple of teams, so it's at least 2 teams, so rifle squad size, riflemen supported. You can see mortar fire coming in. This looks like probably 60 millimeter mortars or VOG 21 grenades, which are coming in. Could also be 30 millimeter grenades. That's the VOG 21 is the underbarrel grenade launcher is the underbarrel grenade round for the Russian forces. You see they're taking basically it's exploding around them, not really taking any shrapnel yet, but the fire is coming in and it is accurate to at least a degree. See, one guy appears to have possibly been wounded through that as he was running. These guys are jumping over here back into the wood line for some cover and concealment. Lots of explosives that we've seen being used throughout this war. It's not... of course, we see gunfights, we see the firefights, but we definitely see a lot more usage of explosives, whether that be automatic grenades, whether that be, we're talking grenade launchers mostly, RPGs, tank rounds, artillery rounds, rockets, missiles, and we don't really get to see, while we do see some, we don't get to see a whole lot of really firefight footage. And we can see their medic is treating their casualty there as we come towards the end. So we do know at least one Ukrainian soldier was wounded during that engagement, but it seems that they continue to press on into town. Whether or not that was successful, we don't know, but it is a relatively small village, but we do see that the fighting is taking place, once again telling us that this village right now is what we would consider to be contested. And while there's been a lot of rumors, in fact, Sergei Haida himself has stated that they are actually within just a few kilometers of some of these locations, including Kremina. We haven't had any photo evidence to prove that was geolocatable enough to prove movement in this map. So this map isn't accurate. We take some pride in the fact that we find out just how accurate it is occasionally. In 2 separate cases of geolocating, we found out that our front lines are actually accurate within about 2 miles, which is very impressive considering I live in the United States. But the information that we have coming out is saying that right now Ukrainian forces are continuing to push very slowly, and this is something that the head of the Luhansk Regional Military Administration admits, little by little, they are pushing towards Svetove, which is here. This is where a major Russian defensive line has been established, and also down here to Kremina, which is the very first city that was actually captured at the outset of the Donbass campaign, and really set the stage for them to take the Luhansk Oblast. That is now being pushed back. What we can see here A very rare beast was actually captured by Ukrainian forces. This is a T-90M. It's the newest version of the T-90, the latest upgrade model, which is also known as the T-90 Abridged 2016. As the latest model of the T-90 has come out, and this is successfully captured, mostly intact by Ukrainian forces here, and along the Svatove area is what it was listed as. So we know it's in this general vicinity as they're pushing towards that city. This is roughly $5 million USD, which has just fallen into the hands of Ukrainian forces. This war in its man and material cost is just incomprehensible to the human mind, just how much a day is being spent. And you have to think some of these assets which have been shot down are costing millions of dollars a piece, and the $27 million a piece per Ka-52 helicopter shot down. We'll get to that here in a little bit. $5 million a piece for one of these, a T-90M. Another additional $34 million for an Su-34. It's just an insane cost value that has been dollar amount that can be added to the statistics list that is coming out of this war. But you can see its capture here.
Паук на приеме. Снимаю отжатый танчик. Не знаю, что за модель.
Т-90.
А ну, братуха, привет передавай.
І так, сука, буде з кожним, хто прийде з нами на нашу землю.
Вот так, блядь. А ну, командира сними, блядь. Пидорасы, юга. Командир на фоне Т-90. Все буде добре.
So, I've got a couple questions coming in here. Delta Aviation 23 asks, do you ever read Ukrainian General Staff reports? I do. I do read the General Staff reports as best I can. We do have limited time when we're going through and we are researching, but I do try to read them as best I can. But I also read them, but I have to understand that the stuff being released publicly is, generally speaking, being released publicly for a reason. There is an information war. It's not separate from the war in general, but we try to think of it as a separate topic because it allows for an ease of breakup in methodology and how we go through and figure out information. Generally speaking, public information is released for a reason, and it's by a nation officially, and it usually is for one of two reasons. It's either for A, to garner support, or B, to undercut the support of somebody else. We see the Russians doing this. Usually it's domestically for them and amongst close allies and friends. Not that they exactly have a lot. And for Ukraine, it's much more outward. It's much more looking for support of other nations and people around the world. But regardless, you have to be careful whenever you're reading official documentation that is being released publicly, because you don't want to read into it too much. Ukraine notoriously has definitely feinted different offensive operations here and defensive operations as well in order to shift the battlefield and shape the battle space as need be and bring attention to certain areas. While the attention certainly in the information coming out is certainly from the Donetsk region, that certainly doesn't mean that other information is not happening elsewhere, including like Zaporizhia, for instance, where we've seen some military activity to a degree, but not a whole lot. And that usually suggests that there's active military operations happening there that we probably shouldn't know about, and probably for good reason. But that is, generally speaking, you have to be very careful when you're reading these documents and you're reading these statements, because you can quickly find yourself falling into, and this goes for anybody, and this goes for any country, any situation, but you have to be very careful and methodical, because you do not want to report misinformation or disinformation, and you want to keep things as accurate as possible without letting somebody or something else dictate that narrative. So I do read them, but I don't heavily report on them, but I do get but I do take what they are saying and then see what information is backing that before I start relaying that information. Something else that Delta ended up asking, how did Russia lose a T-90M intact? Very simply, and we've seen it happen quite often, is the fact it could have ran out of fuel, could have ran out of ammunition, disgruntled troops. It could be a number of things, but it would appear that T-90M more than likely appears to have been abandoned. And so it means that Russian troops ended up just leaving it, and then Ukrainian forces stumbled across it. The indicators definitely seem to suggest that at the very least. We come down here, and this is as we're pushing over towards Crimea, and we do see intense combat coming out of this area. Once again, there have been reports of the Ukrainian counteroffensive beginning in the Svatovo and Crimea direction, and this is the translation we have from our in-house translator, who says, quote, "Fuck off, assholes, at least let us have our coffee first."
Есть. Такая хуйня, ребят.
Чикс и сосны посыпались. Ляп.
Идите нахуй, блядь, дебилы.
Дайте хоть кофе попить, ебать.
Пиздец, ебать.
Also, just to point out this very small detail. See that thing? Yes. If you're willing to hump the weight around with you, that one of those is immensely worth it. Immensely worth it in the field. If you can keep it stocked, if you can keep a gas supply, and you can keep that thing running, right? That is just fantastic. If you have it and you're willing to carry the weight, because ounces equal pounds and pounds equal pain, if you're willing to carry it, it is immensely great. If you're a motorized unit, even better. Just make sure you store the gas in a safe place. But I had a lot of buddies who had one. I never got one myself. I wish I had. I had a lot of buddies that had one of those that they would cook ramen in the field and stuff with. Immensely if you've ever just ate MREs for just weeks on end, and then you have a fresh thing of ramen noodles from one of them cheap ramen packets that someone cooks on this thing, your life is changed forever, and you will never look down at a warm bowl of food ever again. Not to say there's not some good MREs, but they could definitely do better. Jumping over here into Izium with a little bit less of an uplifting topic, we see that 2 people have died as a result of a landmine when delivering bread. This apparently happened on December the 1st, but the information is getting further freshly released as of at least the 3rd. 2 men were bringing bread and the other necessary supplies to the Izium district, which is still very much heavily reliant on humanitarian aid. And when their car was blown up by a Russian mine, both of them ended up dying immediately. And this is what is left of their vehicle. Fortunately, this is definitely not the first time that this happened, and this is definitely probably not the last. Delta Aviation asked, when Ukrainian troops move forward, do they make new trenches? Certainly, yes. We definitely see as they are on the offensive, they make less trenches and they make more fighting positions. And that's definitely a characteristic of it. Trench warfare really hasn't been something that has been in anyone's minds since World War I. Because everyone remembers World War I very, very heavily. And it wiped out entire generations of Europe. There was just entire generations of men just annihilated by the war. In some cases, upwards of 95% of the country's population of young men of fighting age were annihilated during the First World War. It's insane, the amount of death that took place. Over 100,000 casualties at the first day of the Battle of the Somme. For the British, not including German casualties. It's insane to think about in its size and scope. And everyone realized, trench warfare kind of sucks. We probably should never do that again. And so you see very much high-paced, fast maneuver warfare of everyone quite literally trying not to get into a trench warfare situation ever again. Unfortunately, Russia didn't succeed in that, and now they're bogged down in trench warfare along a large portion of their front lines. But being out in the open is extremely deadly. War's really gone past, I mean, we haven't seen full-fledged wars quite on this scale really since World War II. If you look at wars so far in recent modern history, it's a lot of counterinsurgency operations, guerrilla warfare style, asymmetrical style of warfare, whether you're talking about Vietnam or you're talking about Iraq or Afghanistan. It really devolves into an insurgency or a guerrilla style fighting against a larger force that is definitely more military capable against a force that knows it's not military capable but plays to its advantages very well. And you also see that, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, you see where it's usually a complete blowout if it's against a standing military force. And you see that clear up until the Chinese throw all their manpower behind forces in Korea. But if it hadn't been for the Chinese essentially just boosting with millions of men, boosting the North Korean war effort, the North Koreans were already pushed all the way up to the Chinese border. They were going to lose imminently, and China decided to step in, thanks to MacArthur, who said he would like to continue into Manchuria. And the Chinese not really liking that, hence why he gets fired. And then you see it with 2000 or the 1991 invasion of Iraq and Desert Storm, and of course them liberating Kuwait. You see that we just decimate the Iraqi army in that. The Battle of 73 Easting, the largest, one of the last large tank battle in world history, you see happening there, and it's a complete blowout for Iraqi forces, just getting absolutely annihilated. You see the Highway of Death incident happening there. And then you also see that really reoccurring again, 2003, just took a few weeks, and then Baghdad is captured in about a month total, with the fighting really subsiding and those fighters either going home and completely just deserting or turning into resistance fighters in the power vacuum following the collapse of Saddam Hussein. You really don't see two very modernized powers of about equal strength killing each other in a modern battlefield with some of the most modern tools available in the world, unless you're talking about NATO equipment, but really equal capability for what you would consider very strong powers in Europe, which has turned into, statistically, should have never been like this on paper, but in reality we see that devolve into it, and it really gives you a size and scope about how efficiently we have become. About the one thing we are better at than killing each other is building bridges, and we're really good at building bridges, but we've been doing both for almost the same amount of time. We have been killing each other about as long as we built structures to cross water in our natural terrain. And you see how much that has evolved since the last major war in Europe. You've seen how much that's evolved since the last two major powers in the world, or two of the major world powers, in a way, militarily, have gone at each other. And you see just how much destruction that is. And it's gotten to the point where, much like the machine gun changes the complete ideology of war and forces people into a trench warfare situation and completely destroys doctrines of line formations, of colorful uniforms to identify troops on the battlefield, and completely annihilates that is the last time that we see the cavalry charge. It's similar to how it kills that. It has completely killed a lot of modern concepts about 21st century warfare and how it's fought, because things have gotten very deadly now, and the safest place to go is below ground. Now, once again, they will dig trenches as things stall or as they lose momentum, and they'll get back into those defensive positions. But while on the move, they are going to make defensive positions, but they'll be fighting positions. 2-man, 3-man holes in the ground, safe enough for them, but they can fire from, and we've seen them using that to great effect in other parts of the line too, and many, many other videos where they don't have established trench networks yet. Tim Epps says a big similarity between World War I and this is no air superiority. Not entirely true. You see localized air superiority is what I would call it, which means that certain sectors, the front line, or certain areas of Ukraine fall under localized air superiority, meaning the Russians can fly in Luhansk and there's nothing that's going to touch them. Likewise, the Ukrainians can fly over Dnipro, over the city of Dnipro, or Kremenchuk and Poltava, but there's not really a whole lot that's going to reach out and touch them. Because here, there's just an absolute ton of air defense systems that's going to shoot them down, and guys with Stinger missiles and blowpipes and everything else. So so you have localized air superiority in certain places, but you see where that air superiority really gets muddled as you get towards the front lines, where the fighting is happening, and you see them overcoming that by flying nap of the earth in extreme low altitude sorties. But we also see the Russians are flying, and this is something that has been reported by the Defense Intelligence Ministry of the United Kingdom, is that upwards of 300 sorties a day back in March has now dropped to about 10, sorties being a military combat flight. So that's what we're seeing out of the Russian forces. So we're seeing a significant decrease. That's probably due to aircraft losses, manpower losses, meaning that they have lost experienced pilots and people capable of actually operating the airframes, and also a lack of spare parts. We already know that a large part of their fleet is inoperable, and they've been cannibalizing a significant number of them to keep other aircraft up in the air, and it costs a significant amount of time in maintenance in order to keep main aircraft up and running. Does Aviation 23 ask how many aircraft does Ukraine have in storage approximately? I have no idea. I have no idea. I have no idea. I don't know how many aircraft Ukraine had before the war and of what variants, but they've also gotten significant numbers of aircraft since, and so that makes numbers very difficult. But it's also, I don't know, because we don't know the operational tempo from the Ukrainians, who have been very good about operational security. And generally speaking, there are public release numbers, which very much differ from the numbers that are actually in stock and actually capable of operating effectively. Or, reversal, it's inflated, especially as we see on the side of the Russians. They say they have a lot of tanks, but we've also seen what tanks they do have and what shape they're in, and it's not exactly looking good for them. We start to move down here and into the Donetsk region, and we see a significant amount of activity here within the Donetsk Oblast. We start off over here near the de facto head of government within Ukrainian held territory, and we see the daily Donetsk update, which comes from Pavel Krylenko, who's the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration, and he says, quote, on December the 4th, a number of victims of Russian army in Donetsk Oblast increased by 2 injured. So luckily no one has been killed over the last 24 hours. Now, he releases this report at 8 a.m. local time every single day, covering the past 24 hours events. We can see here, this is from his official Twitter, and he releases it both in Ukrainian and in English. And we can see that since the beginning of the Russian Federation's invasion on February the 24th, up until now, so far 1,237 Ukrainian civilians have been killed and 2,682 have been injured just within the Donetsk region. And this doesn't include locations that are in occupied regions, such as the city of Donetsk, which is occupied, or Volnovakha, or Mariupol, where the death toll once again numbers in the tens of thousands. And we know that that number only is continuing to climb, and in many ways has been completely disregarded by the Russians, as we know that, as we have heard from sources inside of Mariupol, if bodies are too badly decomposed, they simply go to the landfill and don't even get a mass burial. Moving on to the front lines, we move over here to Soledar. Soledar runs along the northern flank of Bakhmut. This is the Bakhmut defensive area, and you can see where the activity is really spread. You can see where the Russian forces have attempted, through the map, you can start to see where Russian forces are attempting to conduct a encirclement of Ukrainian troops. Bakhmut really isn't important at this point in the war, or at least it is now, but it wasn't for a very long time. Bakhmut was only important when Russia was in a fine position here in the Kharkiv Oblast, really only up until about July, until their entire flank collapsed. At that point, they had forces north of Liman, and they also had significant forces from Popasna around Bakhmut. And by pushing forces kind of to the southwest, essentially, of Ukraine, they could encircle Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, Kostyunivka, and many of these large settlements, secure a main supply route between their two forces, knock out the administrative head of the Ukrainian government within the Donetsk region, and basically most of the resistance with it. That fell apart in July when Russian forces had their entire flank rolled, and you can see Liman has been pushed back almost all the way to Crimea, and we see that Russian forces have not made any significant gains around Bakhmut. Since then, combat has continued, mostly pressed by the Wagner Group, started in 2014 by a man named Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is also known as Putin's chef because he caters his personal parties as well as high-level military and government parties too. Yevgeny Prigozhin and the Wagner Group, which operate globally, have been operating in this region very significantly. They are the ones spearheading these attacks, and Bakhmut has been stiff. What began as a relatively small but very brutal engagement now has both sides giving significant combat power to this very small area. We figured out this front line, and I can pull out the measuring tool here. This sector of the front line runs roughly 20 miles across, almost exactly, at least according to our estimates. That's 20 miles of combat that you're seeing. That is some of the most fierce that the war has seen yet. It's some of the most brutal, bitter fighting of the war, and it's not measured in victories of kilometers, but instead of inches and meters. That is how you measure victory here. It's very brutal, it's very muddy, it's wet, it is cold, it is miserable. Bakhmut is essentially all but destroyed. After Russian forces were pushed from the outskirts and defensive lines and postures were set around Bakhmut, the Russians decided that their best bet was to encircle the city, and attempted to push both into the north, where they already had a foothold on the outside of Soledar and Bakhmutsky, into the south, which is their newest levels of offensives that we have seen most recently. And we see that here. This is over in Soledar, which is the northern flank. And we see where it seems to have stabilized a little bit. Ukrainian forces were in a very tenuous situation not but a few days ago, where it was very heavy, brutal fighting. It was a question of if the Ukrainian line was going to hold. This entire area, the forests have been leveled and splintered with artillery shells. It is nothing but a bunch of muddy, horrendously difficult terrain that resembles essentially a World War I battlefield. And there are tens of thousands of troops that are fighting in these regions. We can see this tense situation. Morale does appear high as the situation remains tense, and but it does seem a little bit more stable and a little bit more beneficial to Ukrainians. It appears that, at least for the time being, Russian forces have been stalled in Soledar with no significant gains made, but also no significant losses, as Ukrainians are having difficulty pushing them back at this point.
Вітаю. Жодного разу до цього не був у місті Солідар, а зараз можу проводити вам тут екскурсії. Ще в соляних печерах не був, але ось по тому заводу вже погуляв.
And you can see kind of the background there, what's going on in Soledar. But we do have other footage coming out. This is from a Ukrainian reconnaissance group, which is on a reconnaissance patrol, a recon patrol here on foot in the city as they're going out and probing the lines.
Tilluk. Вот доходишь больше, чуешь. Куда же vostai vai te ääs vielä hietonen? Niin, istu se.
Se nietsi. Давно ченнин хряпта.
Sen tähtsä niin, stare.
Мисто лово. Все, я все знаю.
Hujor, solidar jor, hujor. Ha? Все так. Надо лечь дух. Нет, Сандин.
So those are Chechen fighters, by the way, which are fighting on the side of Ukraine. This is the Sheikh Mansour battalion, which we saw fighting very effectively to the north of Kyiv at the beginning of the war, fighting very tenaciously to push back Russian forces in that sector of the front. Delta Aviation says Zabila Sirkva, which is near Kyiv. He said that's where a lot of the aircraft are stored if you want to take a look. Well, as you can see, I think we're going to have some issues. So you got some aircraft being stored there. But that is saying that this is updated satellite footage. And we know, being the fact that it is Google, it's not. So Ukraine has, I mean, it'd be pretty easy to count. You got what, 5 there, 5 there, plus 4, 14, 15, 6, or 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39 if you include the one on the taxiway aircraft in storage there. If you go by the outdated satellite footage, so it's, you know, I don't like to go by off of what Google Maps says, honestly. I appreciate it, though. That is the one. But that's just because, unless I have updated satellite footage, coming from, say, like Maxar or something, then we'll go. But I don't think that is information that I would like to release anyway, because it is operational security. And I don't think that's information that I should release. We do know that an Su-34 has been shot down. This is a $36 million loss for the Russian Federation. This Su-34 reportedly was shot down, but the pilot did not make it. The remnants of the aircraft were confirmed. This is not the first aircraft we've seen shot down around Bakhmut. Another aircraft whose tail number was actually identified was also found, but it was shot down much earlier in the war. The information was not pertinent, except for identification purposes. But the fighting around Bakhmut does continue, and it will continue for some time. Despite the poor conditions, morale does remain very high amongst Ukrainian forces, which have successfully repelled attack after attack against their lines by Russian forces, who at this point have almost seemed to have given up. The kinetic activity around this frontline sector has still continued to increase despite this fact. and it will likely continue for months until Russian commanders there finally decide to give the order to shift their focus elsewhere.
Моя малышка возвращается. Там би не збив нахуй. Вот так вот и работает.
So you can see the general situation around Bakhmut. Once again, the entire city is completely destroyed. I mean, it is completely destroyed. You can see guys just kind of hanging around a little bit. But this city has been completely leveled and destroyed. Yeah, there's not a whole lot left to it. Sci-Fi says the fighters will all be hiding on farms in the middle of nowhere. Yes, likely.
Бахмут це тепер маленький Новосибірськ. От другий етаж. Там на горизонті підари. А тут жили люди. Жили люди, ми вибираємо собі спостерігачку. От як жили люди. Доволі таки хорошо жили. Все. У них була кімната відпочинку. Зайці, тігри, все. Вон, потолки красиві, люстри, все. А тепер тут, блядь, осколки і піздець повний. А все чого? Все, блядь, отам на горбу сидять йобані кацапи. Тут живуть куча долбойобів, які їх звали. І от хлоп, от як виглядає.
Алік резерв, визиває Алік.
Будиночок. Таке.
That's just one of the destroyed buildings. See some of the wreckage of the aircraft that was shot down. This is the aircraft. It's clearly identified marks stated is the Russian Federation aircraft RF 93798 48, also known as 48 Blue. It's an Su-24 that was shot down in the vicinity of Bakhmut. Recently, the weather conditions have significantly improved around the Bakhmut area, which has allowed for some of the relief to be pulled off of, or to allow for some relief and reprieve for Ukrainian ground forces, as the Ukrainian Air Force and their helicopter fleet and jet aircraft have also been coming in and conducting numerous missions and providing even closer air support than normal, given that the weather conditions have now permitted much better visibility for them to do so. So we are seeing a little bit of reprieve and assistance coming from the Ukrainian Air Force on this, which is definitely nice to see. We can see some of those helicopters flying in here as they come in to provide support to Ukrainian troops on the ground.
Наші. Бахмут захищають.
Continue on our march here. Nope, that's the one that we just showed.
Пизда, короче. От вам і Бахмут. Школа. Русский мир. Прийшов, блядь. Самолітами розхуячили. Просто нахуй. Ось дивіться, була п'ятиэтажка, нема п'ятиэтажки.
So you can see the level of destruction coming out of there. And once again, the entire city is just completely destroyed. You see, this is coming from a Ukrainian field hospital around Bakhmut. These are Getty images that have taken these. But you can see the injuries coming off of these guys and the tireless work of the medical staff that are working there, and rather decrepit conditions that are providing this life-saving aid to Ukrainian troops. Fortunately, horrendous casualties have been coming in as the fighting has been very bitter and fierce for both sides, and which has led to a horrendous battle of attrition. This is what is ostensibly considered to be a meat grinder. And see, of course, the classic posing for a photo. A passing M113 armored personnel carrier there on the left seems to have joined in as well. This on the outskirts of Bakhmut. And so we move from Bakhmut and we move to the south, where we're seeing that Russians are using banned K-51 chemical aerosol grenades. Originally developed and used back in the times of the Soviet-Afghanistan War, we see that the K-51 burns for 16 seconds, producing a very thick CS smoke, or CS gas is essentially tear gas. The gas causes temporary disorientation, coughing, and damages the eyes. Once again, these date back to the Soviet-Afghanistan War.
Ось такою хуйнею сьогодні скинув дрон, ще гаряче. Газ димом сильно накриває і дихати не дає. Ось.
So, would they still be effective is a good question. When it comes to chemical agents, and technically the usage of CS gas is a chemical warfare. It is against the Geneva Convention. The usage of CS gas, while it is permissible to be used as a riot-controlled substance within the civilian side of things, the laws of war, based off of the Geneva Conventions, dictate that it is illegal to use chemical agents of any kind, to include CS gas, even though it is so pertinent on the battlefield, as we can see now, that recruits are trained and put through gas chambers through the majority of the world's training events. And I myself have been gassed with CS gas grenades, of course, or CS gas in general. It's not an exceptionally fun experience. I didn't think it was that bad, personally. I paid good attention to how the gas mask works and how to put it on. And how to properly use it. I actually still maintain a mop suit. I got to keep it because it was considered used, and I was able to just keep one of them. I ended up getting one, and so I've done full mop level training. I've gone all the way up to mop 4. We received chemical suits and different agents to treat immediate exposure to chemical weapons of different types when we went into Syria, because at the time the Assad regime, with the backing of the Russians, were using chemical weapons against civilians, as we saw multiple occasions of. And so the threat was very real, and that is one of the reasons why we were so heavily trained on it at the time during our workup, because we knew where we were going for the most part, even if it wasn't exact for obvious secrecy reasons for operations. But regardless, CS gas can be very nasty, especially if it is exceptionally potent, and it can, in large quantities, cause permanent damage, especially to individuals that already have underlying conditions. It is extremely difficult to deal with if you are not properly trained and you don't have the proper equipment. Tear gas is something that you can get used to over extended periods of time and multiple periods of extensive exposure, but if you've never had that, as most troops aren't going to, then it doesn't matter. It has a very distinct odor. It's not quite cinnamon. It's very weird in its odor, but it's very distinct. General rule of thumb, if you smell something that seems very off, it's probably about time to put your gas mask on and go like this. This means gas, gas, gas. But that is kind of, that's kind of what we're looking at here on the with these things. These are gas grenades. These are banned under Geneva Convention. This is illegal in the laws of war, and they're being used reportedly here in Ukraine against Ukrainian troops. They're non-lethal. They're not mustard gas or anything. They're non-lethal, but regardless, it is still not permissible in the laws of war. We jump down here to the south. This is over here over here in Optine. Heavy fighting is continuing in the city of Optine. It's located on the outskirts of Donetsk and has recently become heavily embattled as much as Avdiivka. Located directly to the north of Donetsk International Airport, Ukrainian positions here put significant pressure on Russian forces occupying the regional capital. And this is why this is such an important position. Russian forces have attempted to bomb Avdiivka and the Ukrainian forces there into submission and have launched multiple attacks against it with about every weapon system that they can. And so far, Ukrainian forces haven't really dislodged from their positions as these static defensive lines have been as well established over the last 9 years. Same thing down here towards Pisky and over down here into Marinka, which we will get into. Pisky was the only exception. This is where Ukrainian forces ended up creating a gap in the line, which was exploited, but they quickly reestablished it just to the outside of the city and have been there since. But the entire city of Pisky was destroyed with thermobaric munitions, which we have on video feed and archived in our maps. Optine seeing very significant fighting, and you can hear it here in the background, just quite how significant that is. This is coming from a Ukrainian soldier there in Optine who's walking his way off the line.
Ой, ебать, тесно! Дай мусак, сука! Что, блядь? Голову не высовывай сильно. Да я ебал! Давай! Ебашь! Сука, усуёбы, блядь! Давай.
That is what you would call not having a very good time. Generally speaking, if you're shooting like this, it's probably a really, really bad situation, or you're not very well trained, as we see with a lot of Middle Eastern guys. But these guys have a lot of experience. This tells us that this is not a particularly great situation. You can see they're kind of lying there. They're kind of laying back like, man, for the love of God. And you can see that this guy, I believe, actually ends up getting hit. Yeah, it looks like he ends up getting hit in his hand. Let's see here. Oh, no. That's just something that they have there. Okay. Yeah. Needless to say, not a fun time. Not a fun time at all. Do not envy them whatsoever. Come down here to the south, and this is in Marinka, where the city is destroyed by war. Marinka, much like its sister city of Pisky to the north and over by Avdiivka, which has sustained very heavy bombardment, and while still firmly in Ukrainian hands after a very quick counteroffensive that retook this city not but a few months ago, it's really stalemated since. This continues to put pressure on the Russian flanks, as if Avdiivka falls, if Marinka falls, or Avdiivka, or if either of these Russian positions ended up losing, what ends up happening is it now rolls the flank on the Russians and pushes them directly into the city of Donetsk, which then puts additional pressure onto what is considered a very key strategic command, control, communications, and logistical hub for their forces, as well as a popularity win, kind of a propaganda win for them, is holding a regional capital still, and also having an administrative head in there. And by taking Donetsk, a large majority of the Donetsk region would likely fall as well. So these flanks put an extensive amount of pressure on them, and they are fighting they're fighting very harshly to try and push the Ukrainians back. But these lines have yet to falter, and they are bombarding them daily, almost near constant shelling, which has completely destroyed the landscape what little was left. Oh. So he says, sorry, I appear to have muted myself. Sci-Fi says, stuff is really real nasty. Friend got an aerosol once and sprayed a squirt in the air. You could see the cloud 30 feet away from the edge. It got my eyes. Nose just exploded in pain. Good bear repellent. He's saying it's really good bear repellent. The CS gas. It is good bear repellent. I'm sure it is. But it is nasty. It is not fun. And now, if you have a sinus infection, see, you go to boot camp and you're around a bunch of people from all around the country you've never been around before, you get horrendously sick. I got so sick. But I went to the gas chamber and I wasn't sick anymore because it absolutely just clears your sinuses. It's horrendous. It sucks when it's happening. And it's not very fun to get it in your eyes and stuff. But if you are sick, CS will clear your sinuses really well if you are exposed to it. But don't do that. If you really want to clear out your sinuses, go put a towel over a pot of boiling water. The steam will do it. Or it's like a hot shower. That's why hot showers are really good for it too. But don't CS gas yourself. It's not a fun experience. I do not recommend it at all. It's some people freak out. Some people really freak out in the gas chamber. They have to hold the door closed to make sure people don't run out of there. It's not fun. It's not fun. It's bad. Some people are like that. But as you can see there, the city of Marinka just completely destroyed. We can see that once again here. So this is close combat. These are Russians using a technical vehicle to attack Ukrainian snipers in a building. You can see what's left. I mean, once again, they've been fighting very heavily. You can see destroyed tank there, using a technical vehicle to engage Ukrainian forces. Looks like they're using an ATGM. Possibly a cornet. Yeah. This is, first of all, urban terrain is like a sniper's haven. Not good. Not good at all. You can see they're trying to clear these guys out, and it's difficult. It's very difficult in urban terrain because there's so many places to hide and move and shoot from. And you can see they've already taken casualties there. They're carrying one away on a stretcher, which has knocked out 4 guys. You can see they're hiding behind a destroyed vehicle. We got artillery coming in. Oh, perfectly inside the vehicle. Dropping those VOD grenades on it. We have a lot of footage of them dropping hand grenades on guys. Not exactly, yeah, not exactly your optimal situation. This is essentially a small version of Stalingrad. It is not very nice. It's called MAO. It's called Military Operations in Urbanized Terrain. Is what you would call this. Until the aviation says, are these UA or Russian troops? So are these Ukrainian or Russian troops? Those were Russian troops that were getting annihilated in trying to clear out some snipers, Ukrainian snipers in the city of Marinka. Because the snipers have a huge impact on the battlefield. I I always knew that. It was something, you know, I had always kind of mentally prepared for. And I had found sniper hides before for Islamic State fighters and stuff that weren't in use, but I found some when I was on deployment. And I learned a lot because one of the things that I tested, one of the cool things that I got to do in my time in the Marine Corps after I became a corporal is I got to help create some doctrines and work on different types of usage for my job with other units. Specifically, I and one of the top snipers in my sniper platoon within my company, we took his team and we took myself and a javelin gunner, and we actually embedded a javelin team into a sniper hide. And we actually rolled with snipers and tried to develop tactics that would work using the javelin system with a sniper platoon. Providing additional security for them in a sniper hide, providing an anti-armor capability, but also an immensely powerful observation capability that they may not normally have. And it really shows you how effective that they can be on a battlefield, because they have a huge psychological impact. To the point that they threw squads of guys at just a couple of snipers to try and root them out, because they are absolutely deadly and they cause immense panic on a battlefield. And they're extremely intelligent in their craft. There's snipers, generally speaking, are some of the most intelligent individuals I've ever seen in my life, hands down. They are extremely, extremely intelligent at not just their job. JL says, asked everyone in the chat, and I'm going to say myself included, what are your favorite Ukrainian creative inventions and solutions so far? Tim Epps says, I like the unmanned boats. I like the unmanned boats too. Kamikaze drone boat and trench pizza oven. That's coming from Sci-Fi. Yeah, that's a pretty good one. That's the trench pizza oven's pretty hard to beat for like lifestyle choices. Just in general, the field kitchens that they are building inside some of these things is just impressive. Like their trench lines are just absolutely impressive. We'll see if anyone else comes up with some good ones. That's a really good question. What do you think? What is your favorite so far Ukrainian creative inventions and solutions to some of their problems that they have? Whether that be in the trenches, whether that be actually like in combat or what have you. Just, I don't know, maybe that's something to put in the comments on the video if you guys haven't, or also in the chat. Read some of them off if it's in the chat here with us live. Kharkov was shelled. Shelling took place in Kharkov in the Donetsk region all night between the 3rd and the 4th, leaving apartment buildings and residential areas damaged and smoking come morning. We can see some of the destruction there. Obviously, direct hits on apartment complexes. Those are not military targets. You see damaged civilian residential infrastructure as well. Once again, these are not military targets. Volodar has seen quite an extensive amount of activity, though information is a little sparse. And we've seen where activity and kinetic activity for the Russian side especially seems to be showing the Russians are continuing to attempt to assault Volodar. Now, you can see here, Google Maps did update to a degree, and you can see in many places now where some of the fighting has really taken place and the level of destruction that has taken place as a result. Volodar, you can start to see some of the craters and potholes that just line this area as a result of the immense amount of fighting that has taken place here. But that continues pretty much in many other sectors. Now, Google Maps is kind of sporadic in its update areas, but we just get kind of a tiny section here. But Volodar seems that Russians are attempting to assault Volodar, but really have little to nothing to show for the immense losses that they have taken. We have some pretty good footage of that coming out today. So they really don't have the troops or supplies or manpower in this sector of the front to really launch an offensive like this. Most of their stuff has been dedicated to the fight in Bakhmut and has been rerouted to them, as that is the pressing matter at the moment. And so we really see significant casualties suffered simply because they're not coordinated enough and they don't have the equipment. This appears to be a BMP, which immediately... Yeah, so this is a BMP which is immediately just annihilated immediately upon crossing the berm to depart friendly lines to begin the attack. Take a look. And you can see it's loaded with troops on top too, by the way.
Давай, давай, давай! Скорость бросай! Вот задним езжай, давай!
So, this is why they ride on top of these things. It may seem dumb, but if you notice, look right here. You see what you don't see? You don't see a V. So, all of that explosive energy with a flat bottom vehicle. This is why Humvees were so deadly during the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and why we transitioned to running MRAPs. And why running MRAPs is extremely intelligent in a war that is notoriously littered with mines and explosives everywhere, is because the flat bottom, imagine this is the bottom of that vehicle, and this is the landmine. What ends up happening is that landmine, when it goes off, all that energy gets pushed up, and it hits that flat bottom of the vehicle, and it has no place to go. It can either go outward, or it can go up, and it's going to go up. So what ends up happening is now, since it has nowhere to go, this energy is not going to give. It's going to be the vehicle that gives. And the BMP-1, perfect example, only has between 12 and 25 millimeters thick of rolled homogeneous steel. It's not very thick. In fact, a 50 cal can penetrate it, especially if you're using APAPI or if you're using SLAP-T, Sable Light Armor Penetrator, or Sable Light Armor Penetrator Incendiary, or Tracer. And so it hits the bottom of the vehicle, and it pushes up and into the vehicle. And for the most part, that means for the vast majority of the vehicle, either where the ammunition stowage is, which therefore causes sympathetic detonation and the rest of the vehicle explodes, or into the crew compartment, or into the transport department, which is in the back of the vehicle. You can also, generally speaking, carry more troops on the top than you can actually inside. So, as you see during Vietnam, with troops riding on the very top of an M113 instead of inside, the reason that they did that is because they were taking them, and another reason why you don't see them wearing flak jackets, even though they were issued them, is they're putting them on the insides of the M113s to give them some protection. You see that being done again with the Humvees during the early parts of the Iraq and Afghan war. And then you also see them riding on the top of it because now there's multiple layers between them and the explosive charge that goes underneath, or that goes on underneath, or goes off underneath them. So it goes up. So instead of pushing into the crew compartment, it pushes into the crew compartment. It doesn't really kill anybody or injure anybody, but the crew necessary inside to operate the vehicle, who in general are separated by a lightly armored wall, and then everyone else on top is sitting on top of another armored box. So you double the armor thickness between you and the explosive charge, and it's easy to escape should something like that happen. You see that happening once again during Vietnam when the M113s are being operated there. You see that here by both sides being operated here. And as you can see, quite a significant number of them probably only got away with very light injuries, despite the vehicle being catastrophically destroyed. You can see it literally falling apart You see giant sections raining down upon this vehicle. You can see most of the guys are coming back. And you can see this guy, he's like, do we go forward? Like, do we continue this? Do we continue this attack? And the guy's like, no, we're just not. Yeah, well, nope. That's enough for one day. I think we're good. So that is the mentality of that. So I hope that helps you understand why MRAPs are so important and why people ride on the top of these vehicles. It doesn't make sense until you understand the dangers of the war zone itself and why someone would do this. And the reality is that there's a lot of landmines and a lot of explosive hazards that would do this, not just an anti-tank guided missile, but it would do this to an armored vehicle, especially a really lightly armored one, which is the BMP series, unfortunately. Is just really under-armored for what it is. And you can say the same thing about the M2 M3 Bradley, but the M2 M3 Bradley is it's lightly armored, but it's much more capable in other areas, which is its purpose as an infantry fighting vehicle. The BMP series doesn't provide much support, and it doesn't have a wide range mission, and it's also is vastly undermanned and underpowered and under-armored as a result. We also see the results of a significant amount of shelling which has been hitting the city. You can see the damage to administrative buildings, apartment complexes, damaged piping, damaged yards, parks. Several different days of shelling being shown here, the 3rd and the 4th. See apartment buildings once again, residential houses, more apartment buildings, more residential houses. Most of these shells are not landing on military targets, despite the fact that there are military targets to engage. Most of the shelling isn't landing on them. It's not uses of precision weaponry, which means that it isn't being directed as a mitigate. There isn't a mitigating factor to limiting collateral damage and loss of civilian life, which is why under Protocol 1, once again under the 1949 Geneva Conventions, which was adopted in 1977, these would be considered a war crime. There are indiscriminate bombardments of a highly populated civilian concentration of both either individuals, civilians, or of civilian property. Jump back up here a little bit, because I missed this point, and because it covers the entire Donetsk region, where we see that Russia is feeding more people into the meat grinder. I am not kidding when I say that the Donetsk region is a meat grinder. It is an absolutely horrendous situation. It is absolutely deadly for all sides, but the attacking force, being the Russians, will have statistically extremely higher casualties as a result, and they're already having manpower issues, and that's probably not going to change for a while. But we see them drawing even more equipment reserves, heading towards the front line here. This is in the Donetsk region. That is a crane and a recovery vehicle. You can see armored vehicles. These are tanks, I believe, that are being pulled into service here, judging by the fact that they have explosive reactive armor. Of course, they have the cheap invasion markings painted on them. I think this guy's waiting for traffic. You can see he's going to try and pass here. You can see the explosive reactive armor on the sides of these vehicles. Lots of recovery vehicles. Bookham 40 says, did you talk about the terrible ratio of Russian cruise missiles getting through versus getting shot down? 60 out of 70 shot down is pretty piss poor. It's 70 plus right now is what they said is firing. The number is 70 is what everyone keeps quoting, but the official Ministry of Defense of Ukraine says 70 plus. So they believe there are additional, or there are likely additional missiles that did come into Ukraine that were either shot down or failed to reach their targets or what have you. But that is just a rough number. Now, 60 out of 70 is probably exactly what the Russians were planning for. I do not believe, and we see this by the effects of what's happening throughout the Ukraine right now, which is there was significant damage to civilian infrastructure, and significant power outages have occurred throughout Ukraine, lights flickering in pretty much every region, once again, really keeping Ukraine, it's like kicking it while it's down. They're just trying to get back up, and you kicked them again. Is pretty much what Russia is doing. The point of the missiles, it seems like a huge number, but that's because it requires a huge number. The issue is that the point of these missiles is the expectation is that most of them are going to be shot down. The Russians aren't oblivious to that. They know that their missiles, the vast majority, are going to get shot down by air defense systems. They continue to launch them in massive waves anyway. The reason being is it overwhelms the air defense systems, and it guarantees that some are going to get through and some are likely going to hit their targets. Not all of them, probably not even a majority of them, because they know exactly what Ukraine's capable air defense-wise. They've been fighting this war as long as Ukraine has been, and they know what their capabilities are, and they also know that their capabilities are improving. But 60 out of 70, that's probably was the expectation. It was probably a very low expectation of the number of missiles that will get through, but increasing your chances by firing more, so that way the missile systems simply have too much to handle all at one time. So it seems piss poor, but there's actually a methodology behind it, and it's about the only thing that Russia has actually methodically planned. Speaking of some of these missile shootdowns, we can see a Gepard shooting one down in action here. This is the first time a video footage of a Gepard. A Gepard is an anti-aircraft platform, or an AAP. It's a it has dual autocannons that fire at an extremely high rate of speed, and ends up completely just demolishing this thing. But it's German. It's a German system. It's very effective at what it does. It's a great air defense system, and we see it operating very well within its role here. So this is some awesome footage. This is of a Gepard, the first footage of a Gepard in action shooting down a cruise missile from today. Take a look.
Есть контакт!
Сука.
Есть, бля, родимая, готи, суку! Уху!
So basically everyone and their mother is shooting at the sky whenever one of these things is coming close. And the reason why he starts shooting is, if you notice, this thing doesn't stop. This thing, so you can see the cool thing about the Gepard, and it's actually one of the ones that we have in the Book of Knowledge. For those that may be new here, I maintain, if you look at that bottom shelf there, that is nothing but military manuals for all sorts of things, mostly technical manuals, but I maintain them for all of the stuff that I achieved in the Marine Corps, or all the things that I received in the Marine Corps that I can show, I try to show. I have certain ones that are for official use only, and I don't show those on stream, and I verify that the knowledge is public before I can actually disclose any of it. But this is public. So this is my actual anti-tank missileman's course guide that I received when I was going through my training for the course. And one of the major things it has in it, aside from teaching you different armored vehicles, is armor ID. So you have to be able to identify different types of armor from various distances. And one of the main ones that you learn is the Gepard, which is an anti-aircraft platform once again. And here's what it says about the Gepard. The Gepard is a German anti-aircraft platform used by Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. And it has a double set of road wheels. We don't care about that. Vehicle is a smooth upper glacis. Yep. Rolled homogeneous steel, of course. So it has a round, semi-rotating tracking radar fitted to the turret, front and rounded. So the very front of the turret, that round bit, is actually a radar system. And then a rectangular target acquisition radar fitted to the turret rear, which folds down to prevent damage during movement, which is that thing you see spinning over there. Let me take a look. So it has dual Oerlikon KDA 35mm hypervelocity cannons with a maximum effective slant range of 4,000 meters. These cannons are fitted to the outside of the turret, much like the Soviet 2S6M. So it has a maximum road range of 550 kilometers and a road speed of 65 kilometers an hour. Ken Brown says, please explain what exactly is happening in a firefight. It seems to me that they are just firing through the trees and wasting ammo. Well, so, and this can go for a number of firefight videos. The difficulty is that when you're talking about a camera lens, it doesn't really do justice. It doesn't quite tell you just how close an individual is. Or it has a very weird field of view. And if you ever take an actual picture, you can, and you actually look for yourself, you put them side by side, you'll see this in action. The field of view is different, and that gives the optical illusion that it makes it difficult to see certain details in a photograph, especially in film that's being taken on someone's phone, for instance. And when we have really good phones, generally speaking, not everyone can afford that stuff, and it's relatively difficult. These things get dirty in combat and what have you. GoPros are really great, but they don't always provide the best footage. And another thing is that it makes it seem like individuals are further away than what they actually are. And think of it like when you're looking in the mirror of your car. Objects in the mirror may appear further than they are. That warning applies to this footage too. Same kind of optical illusion. And it seems like they are firing in just a bunch of tree line. The thing is, with a combat situation and with a firefight, it's very hectic. In the best description you could give, it would be considered controlled chaos. Now, the footage that we showed here, and I can go back to it, whereas the situation is just not very good. Let's see if I can... I think it's this one. No, I think it might be this one. No, that is just the destroyed city. Sorry, I'm trying to find the correct footage here. Yeah, this one. So as you can see, like this situation right here, it's bad. I said that too. I said, like, this is a bad situation in general. These guys, you can see that they are hunkered down. They are shooting without really aiming down the sights. I mean, watch this guy. But there's a purpose to this. It seems stupid, but the best medicine in the world is rounds down range. And generally speaking, the enemy is over there, is what he's saying. So this is a type of fire. This is what we would call suppressive fire. Suppressive fire, its only purpose is not, it can kill somebody, but that's not really the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to get the bad guys to stop shooting at me and to put his head down in the dirt. So at least give him the impression that he can get shot and that he can get injured. But in reality, it's not really the whole point. That's why with weapon systems like the AR-15 or the M16, M4, or whatever you're talking about, any weapon system that's usually operated by personnel like this, that's not an area of effect weapon, will have two different types of accuracy. It has a point target, which means if I correctly aim and fire the weapon system, it will hit the target which I am immediately trying to engage. Meaning, if I accurately aim at you, I will hit you up to, for instance, for the M4, it's 550 meters. If at 550 meters maximum, I can shoot at you. And if I am aiming correctly, I will hit you square where I am aiming. Now, it goes beyond that, where you have something called an area effect. You have an area target. And that maximum effective range, an area target means that I will put rounds in your general vicinity out to 830 meters, for instance. that is for suppressive fires, which are generally better at longer ranges. Machine guns, their whole purpose is suppressive fires. They are meant to keep the enemy's head down, to allow for another team to maneuver in close to them and actually engage them and kill them. Machine gunners, unless you have the wet dream of what's called enfilade fire, or just a giant group of people or a bunch of dudes in a row that's perfectly crossing your gun, generally speaking, you're providing suppression. That's their job. They're trying to let you maneuver so that other teams, other people can maneuver and actually close with and kill the enemy. But you're keeping the enemy's head down so that way they can't engage your friendly forces as they're trying to creep up on them and kill them instead. Basically, you're making sure that you're keeping their heads down until the time is right. And that is really what's happening in a lot of ways. Now, there's also something called RTR, which is for whenever you become engaged. So if I am conducting a patrol and suddenly we take contact, someone starts shooting at us, what ends up happening is RTR stands for return fire, take cover, return accurate fire. So if I become engaged, then what ends up happening is we all drop and we flip it onto 3-round burst and we just dump a magazine in the general direction of where we're taking fire. It establishes what's called fire superiority. Because of that, it means that they are now suppressed. It now means that they know that you have more guns, which immediately puts them into a panic. And now it allows you gives you time to find cover, to take cover, and then you can throw another magazine or belt into your weapon, and you can start accurately actually engaging your target and trying to maneuver and close with and kill that target. So you see that sometimes, especially with ambushes. The best thing for an ambush is to assault through the ambush. Take the fight to the enemy if you're ambushed. So that's one of many reasons. A lot of it could be providing suppression for buddy moving. So while one guy is so it's called buddy rushing. One guy lays down suppressive fire, the other guy pushes up. He lays down suppressive fire, allows you to move to bound to your next location, where you're now going to lay down. Up he sees me, up he sees me, I'm down. Up he sees me, I'm dead. Whatever you want to say, is the ditty for it. That's generally speaking what you're saying, but it seems like it's a lot of wasted ammo, and sometimes it is. But in the end, it's actually really worth it. There's a point to it. I understand in some cases there isn't. Some cases it's just a bad situation. And in some cases, guys are starting to go cold. They're going code red, code black, where they're starting to lose it. They're pinned. They're under an immense amount of stress, and that blood and that adrenaline's flowing, and they're they're tunnel visioning, and things just aren't going very well. They're not mentally there for the fight, and it can become difficult. But for the vast majority of it, it's a combination of factors that makes it seem like they're just wasting a bunch of ammo, when in reality, there is actually a point to a lot of it. It's just something that you wouldn't normally be able to understand if you haven't had a first-hand experience with it, I think is the best way to say it. And that goes for a lot of things. If you don't have experience with it, it can be very hard to understand. But I hope that gives you some insight and some explanation to at least some of the footage you may be seeing and watching regarding some of these firefights, when things are going wrong or they're engaging somebody for either side. Keep in mind, these aren't NATO troops. These aren't troops that are NATO trained for the most part. These guys are this is their battlefield. They're changing their tactics on the battlefield. They're not up to NATO level. They don't have the same kind of training. Most of their guys, they were trained in Soviet doctrine and then later trained by NATO forces after 2014 with very limited numbers. That's most of the NCO Corps that you see, or non-commissioned officer corps that you see in Ukraine, was trained by American forces. I had some buddies that went over there and trained them for the javelins, which is really cool. But they're learning this stuff on the fly, but they don't have to be as good as the United States. They don't have to be as good as the UK. They just have to be better than the Russians, because that's the competition. And in war, there's no there is no second place. You're either first place or you're dead, or your buddy's dead more often than not. So that's, you know, that's kind of the best way to look at it. They don't have to be as great as the United States. They just have to be better than the Russians. So I hope that answers your question in a thorough manner. We come over here. Let's see here. We come over here, and this is what we call nap of the earth flight. The Ukrainian pilots have shown incredible skill with their flying capabilities. I mean, absolutely incredible. This is called nap of the earth flight. This is what pilots do, and what it does is it minimizes their exposure to anti-aircraft fire. One, you're flying, generally speaking, below the radar, quite literally. And while it is extremely dangerous as you're flying in and amongst the trees and the power lines and hazards that could be in your way, pilots for Ukraine have shown immense skill with their aircraft and their airframes to be able to pull this off in quite successful numbers. Even seeing Mi-24 Hind helicopters flying all the way through air defense systems to Belgorod and attacking it earlier in the war using Hind systems and then flying back successfully. We see nap of the earth flight being conducted here by some Mi-8 transport helicopters, usually the AMTSH versions, which are the attack variants of those. And we see them doing it very, very successfully. Right now, it's very horrendous road conditions, so helicopter flight is kind of the safest path right now as you get bogged down on those dirt roads, considering all the mud that has been kicked up in the Rasputitsa, which in Russian literally translates to sea of mud. But just take a look.
Довгий, добре їм, правда, що їм тут їздити не треба?
Notice this guy's truck is sinking in the mud.
Може б вони дьорнули нас якось?
Ви попросити їх.
Ну. Весело.
So yeah, pretty good. That just illustrates the successful, you know, just how good those pilots are, because that is an extremely difficult, extremely dangerous type of flying, and they are constantly doing this. Their pilots are constantly doing that because it limits their exposure, so it limits how much Russian forces have time to use man pads or air defense systems to actually fire at them. They can't see them until they're almost right on top of them, and then by the time they acquire the target, they can't actually fire their system because they're gone, because they've already hit the next grove of trees. It makes it very difficult to engage them, and they're below the radar, so most fixed emplacements can't pick them up on radar to successfully engage them. So it's extremely dangerous, but it pays dividends when you're talking about conducting close air support and trying to do medevacs and what have you. And it's something that pilots train to do, and while it is difficult, it shows your skill as a pilot, one, and two, we do see it being used very heavily, and it's a necessity, as we've seen just how many helicopter shoot downs have occurred throughout Ukraine. And we actually get to take a look at one right now. This is what happens when you don't fly that low in Ukraine. This is a Russian Ka-52. The NATO designation for this helicopter is the Alligator. The Ka-52 in 2020, the most recent update, they had 127 of these helicopters. Depending on the source you go by and depending on the information they have available, so far Ukraine has shot down anywhere from 15 to about 27 of those 127 airframes, which constitutes extensive losses, especially when you say we don't know the exact number, at the unofficial document. We also don't know how many have actually been properly maintained, as we know that corruption within the military forces of the Russian Federation, and also and on top of that, just basic incompetence, means just how much of the aircraft is just how many of these aircraft can actually fly and how many have been cannibalized. We see what happens with their tank stocks and what's officially published, and we see what's coming out of that. And we also know that a vast majority of the Air Force hasn't been committed to the war because it just can't fly. definitely a lot lower than 127 of these things. But this is what happens when you don't fly Nap of the Earth. This is, once again, a beautiful shoot down by Ukrainian air defenses of a Ka-52 Russian Alligator.
Да! Да, сбили,
Absolutely beautiful shoot down. So you can see it's flying there. And you can see when that missile hits, and it just destroys that helicopter. It immediately sends it down. This guy freaks out because that is considered one of the best helicopters in the world, by the way. One of the best ground attack helicopters in the world. And you see it just spinning out of control here as it impacts the Earth. And it just slams to the ground. Likely unsurvivable. There's no real way to bail out of a helicopter as it is crashing, and they basically took a nosedive straight for the Earth at very high speeds. Now, there has been reports that many of these crashes have been reportedly survivable by Russian crews, as the Ka-52 is a relatively sturdy airframe. But, however, we can't confirm that information, and by most accounts, most aircraft like this, most helicopters like this, generally speaking, not survivable when they crash like that. I missed what kind of helicopter that is. That is a Ka-52, which is NATO designation is Alligator. It is a ground attack aircraft, relatively new airframe by the Russian Federation. It's considered one of the best ground attack aircraft in the world, behind the AH-64 Apache, AH-64E being the newest variant. Originally flown in 1973, but it's received numerous upgrades and refits. The Ka-52 is a newer platform. It is based off of the Ka-50, which is a single-seater platform. This one takes many of the Ka-50 platform and widens it to include a side-by-side seating as if you were in a car for a pilot and a co-pilot, and extends the amount of capability it has in order to fly and carry ordnance. But it also takes the tail rotor out and uses a tandem rotor design, which means the point of a tail rotor is that it provides anti-torque. So if you have something spinning in a circle, if you see what happens when you ever seen Black Hawk Down, when they lose their tail rotor and they just kind of spin around in circles as they go down, that's because there's no torque. There's nothing pushing back against the propeller spinning around and around. And so anti-torque, there are two main rotors. For a dual rotor design, there are two main rotors and they spin in opposite directions, and it cancels out that movement. This is why Chinooks have two helicopter rotors but no main tail. They spin in opposite directions, and one is slightly lower than the other to make sure they don't interfere with each other. They're supposed to be able to survive hard landings, but not that. Yes, most airframes can survive relatively hard landings. You'd be surprised at just how hard they can be. I can personally attest. But that is not, that did not look survivable. Bookham40 asked, was it a top-down javelin attack? No. So you can engage slow, low-flying helicopters with the Javelin anti-tank missile. You can do that. That is something you can do. It is not generally something you train to do. We touch on it very lightly in training, and it's never really touched on again. But slow, low-flying, or hovering helicopters can be engaged. You do not engage it with top-down attack. You engage it with the direct attack mode on the Javelin. The reason being is because the main rotor can actually deflect the missile. Believe it or not, it has a chance to actually deflect the missile, and you just end up causing an erratic missile essentially. Two, it gives it a larger target to actually strike, and gives you a larger target to actually lock onto. Or not really that it's different to lock onto it, but it gives it a larger target to actually hit. With a top attack, you are minimizing very much how much space that missile has to actually impact its target and has the adjustments for. Whereas a direct attack mode, one, it can adjust itself in flight all the way to the target, and two, as opposed to using momentum and having to adjust as it comes down. And 2, it gives it a much wider area to actually track the target itself in order to it to impact on target properly. He says it looks like it was destroyed from above. Well, let's see if we can get it almost frame by frame. So it looks like, yes, so you can see the flash there above it. And so the possibility is that this may not have actually been a direct impact. Most anti-aircraft systems don't work by actually detonating on the surface of the aircraft itself, but most of them work similar to the way that flat guns do, which is that they burst nearby and pepper it with shrapnel, disabling and cutting hydraulic and fuel lines and disabling the aircraft. Generally speaking, that's how a lot of systems work, and most anti-missile defense systems work in this way too. They don't impact the missile; they explode near it, destroying it in flight. That appears to be what is happening here. That does not appear that it actually detonates on the aircraft itself, but instead peppers the aircraft. It detonates near the aircraft, close to its target, and completely just shreds that airframe to where it is no longer capable of flying correctly. That is what that appears to look like. A Javelin missile, generally speaking, you won't have that large of an explosion unless you get what's called a sympathetic detonation, which is not something you would normally get on this airframe until it impacts the ground. You would not usually get that. A sympathetic detonation means that all of the fuel and ammunition on board the aircraft simultaneously detonates, and you see that the airframe goes down, and what is ostensibly a large piece of the main part of the airframe telling us that the aircraft did not completely detonate in and of itself. It's a shape charge. It doesn't create a huge explosion. It really doesn't. It's a shape charge. It's very, very small. The effects of it are extremely small for what it actually is, which it blows a lot of people's minds, but it's not that huge. And he said that they are Ukrainian. Ukrainians that were trained by us on how to use these things, by the way. And I know my buddy and I were friends because we went through the same course to do that. We went through the same 0352 course, and he went and trained Ukrainians on how to use these weapon systems. So I know that we both got the same thing and know the same things about the Javelin, and I know that what he would have passed on. We come down here. This is in Polihi, and Polihi is seeing quite an extensive amount of Russian activity. By the way, that's our co-host, Tally, the cat. Okay, she's going to clean herself instead. We see a lot of Russian activity here in Polihi. This is a major railhead here for the Russians, but it's also very close to the front lines. We're seeing quite an extensive amount of logistical vehicles running both ways. This is filmed by somebody inside. He says, it's confirmed Javelin hit on Ka-52. Who's confirming this as a Javelin hit on a Ka-52? This is not a Javelin does not do that to a weapon, to a helicopter. Anyway, so this is an extensive amount of Russian logistical activity here in Polihi. This is recorded by an individual who is living in occupied territory here, who filmed it from a relatively hidden spot, and we do see quite an amount. Now, it's possible that these indicate link-ups between Tokmak and further down south, Melitopol. Tokmak, we know, has been a hub for Russian military activity already. That's right here. And Melitopol, further down here, is the de facto head of Russian-controlled Zaporizhia. And we also see it could be running towards Huliopol, where you know that there's significant military activity here by the Ukrainians. Specifically, the Azov Regiment is actually located up there, or at least last we heard that they were. That's where parts of one of the Azov regiments is located, is in the Huliopol area.
туди і назад їдуть. Та все.
So as you can see, quite an extensive amount of military logistical activity happening around Pali, which tells us that there are some large groups of military forces within this general vicinity. Yeah, so that's kind of what we're looking at here. Demise FPS says, I thought y'all were saying it was a javelin. I came into the stream. Yeah, no, it is not a javelin. I do not believe it. Apparently, if Bookham said he heard a rumor that it was, that shoot down of the Ka-52 does not appear to be a javelin. It appears to be a purpose-built anti-air defense missile. So an air defense missile of some kind that does not appear to be a javelin. A javelin, generally speaking, from my experience, would not do that to a helicopter, or it would not have that kind of an effect upon detonation with a helicopter. It just does not seem... I'm not going to say it's not plausible, because I've seen crazy stuff happen that's sometimes you just can't explain how that worked. But I'm saying it's improbable that probably was a javelin. I'm not going to rule anything out. I wasn't there. But from my experience, that doesn't appear to be... The way that a javelin works is it has a shape charge. So generally speaking, the explosion is relatively small when it impacts and doesn't actually blow up. Yeah, so the reason why turret tossing happens is because of how Russian tanks are built. And as a result, also Chinese tanks, because they are basically just rip-offs of whoever's design they want to take. Like the Type 85 TAC-3 is exactly like a T-90, in case you didn't know. T-80, T-90 crossed with some Chinese flair to it. But the way that a javelin works, when its detonation actually happens, is it's a tandem charge warhead. There's two explosions. They happen just fractions of a second behind each other. So it hits the target and it crushes the front end of this. It crushes, and that sets off an explosion of the first charge. There's two charges. That's why it's called a tandem charge warhead. You'll hear that used often. The TOW missile, which is that behind me, that's a TOW-2 Alpha. That also has a tandem charge warhead. It has two warheads. The first explosion, the first charge, blows away any reactive armor on an armored vehicle. All those little blocks you see on the armored vehicle, that's reactive armor. It's meant to destroy that. The second charge, think of it like an ice cream cone. And inside of it's an ice cream cone of explosives on the inside of the missile. And what ends up happening is there's a small explosive at the very tip of the ice cream cone. And it punches this empty ice cream cone, and it punches that end through itself. It's literally punches the end through itself, and it creates this tiny sliver. In fact, it's only about the size of a quarter or a $50 when it's done. And it punches and melts a hole through the armor, and it spews all this hot metal from the missile, but also from the actual armor itself that it's melted through all of the inside of the armored vehicle. But the hole itself is only about a quarter. It's only about a quarter sized or a $50 sized. It's not very big at all. It never has been. It's a jet of molten metal going through there. And that's generally speaking how it works. So it's not a huge explosion. It's not a huge explosion like people think. It's usually a kind of a puff of smoke. And then if you hit a target that has ammunition and fuel in it, it'll burn the ammunition and the fuel when all that super hot molten metal sprays all over everything. And it sets off the ammunition, which is in a circle underneath the turret of a T-series tank, which is what causes the turret flip contest happening. And it also sets off the fuel when those rounds from inside the tank punch through the armor inside the tank and into the fuel tanks and detonate those too. That's when you get this big fireball effect explosion that looks like it's from Hollywood. It's not the missile blowing up, it's the tank blowing up, and there's a difference. The missile blowing up's actually kind of lackluster if you're hitting it against just a target. It's not a whole lot to it. It's just kind of a puff of smoke. There's not really a big fireball or anything. It doesn't really, because it's not what it's meant to do. It's not Hollywood. It's just kind of most explosions honestly are really lackluster. They're not Hollywood like at all. They're just kind of puffs of smoke. But that's how a javelin works in a sense. Not to get into any like crazy details that that I can't like disclose, but that's how it works in general. So I hope that kind of gives you a better understanding as to why I don't think that is a javelin. Because a javelin also, like I said, has to actually impact its target in order to detonate. Because it has to crush, and it has to detonate when it crushes on the front end. And it doesn't look like that actually crushed. It doesn't look like it actually impacted with the KA-52, which wouldn't crush the end of the aircraft. And then that molten jet. This is why sometimes using a javelin's kind of overkill, because you'll actually shoot through a target sometimes with if it's slightly armored enough. Generally speaking, it doesn't happen, but there's a possibility that with things like a very hollow light airframe, you can actually just punch through it and not really do any damage to it. Just because you're kind of going overkill. It's a possibility, not very often, but it's a possibility that you have to think for, which is why there's different types of anti-armor weapons like RPGs and AT-4s and laws and stuff. Speaking of javelins, suggestions say a javelin hit is survivable when a BMP is hit. Yes, it can be. A BMP can be survivable. Any vehicle can be survivable to a javelin hit. The javelin, just because it's survivable for the crew, though, doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. It will knock out the vehicle, and that's the purpose of it, is to knock out the vehicle. Generally speaking, the BMP series is very thin armored, which isn't very good when you're talking about protection, but it can be survivable because most of the space on the inside isn't taken up with fuel and ammunition. Instead, it's taken up with crew compartments, which generally speaking won't have a lot to blow up on the inside, meaning generally speaking, there's a chance you will not get that what I call sympathetic or catastrophic detonation of the vehicle, quite like you would like a fully laden tank. Same thing if you properly are stowing your ammunition and you're not stowing it in the bottom of the vehicle, the bottom of the turret with ready ammunition, like the auto loaders for the T-72s do. Like the T-62s should probably actually survive probably survive a javelin better because they don't have an auto loader installed, like the T-72s and onward do. So it's not stowed in the bottom of the turret like a normal tank is, or like a normal T-Series tank is that we see so far. So they should actually fare better against a javelin hit than any other vehicles, even though they have worse armor. But it won't blow up instantly, or it shouldn't blow up instantly as often as say a T-72 or a T-80 or T-90 will. But yes, I can believe a BMP is survivable. A lot of things are survivable. I mean, but that doesn't necessarily mean you'll feel very good afterwards, and it also means that your BMP is probably blown up and is no longer of any use to you. Speaking of blown up vehicles, we can take a look at this. This is pretty shiny. So you kind of have to get these things out of the way somehow. This is a destroyed, supposedly Russian destroyed. This is what is called a BRDM-2. It's a very, very lightly armored. This thing is super small. It's kind of tall for what it is, but it's a reconnaissance vehicle and an infantry support vehicle, mostly used for reconnaissance. It's known as a BRDM-2, which is best to describe as balls right down the middle, because you have the 4 main wheels, but underneath this big box here that is the hull, there are 2 really small wheels that should be there. I don't think they're there anymore looking at this, but you have to tow these things away somehow, and you have to clean up the landscape somehow. So that's what we're looking at here. That's a no from me. I would have just left it. Scrap in place, man. Scrap in place. That's no use recover. There's no recovering that vehicle, by the way. I mean, look at the barrel. It just completely blown out the barrel. I mean, there's no recovering that. But it makes for a pretty show, I guess. So, here's a topic, but I'm... Okay, but why? Because clean up... You got to clean it up, I guess, at some point. Scrap metal, man. I don't know. Target practice. The hell if I know. But to get back to like a serious topic here, it is a serious topic. We're trying to keep it a little uplifting here, but history is becoming reality. And we see that in many different instances throughout the duration of this war. And it's becoming especially horrendous now. These are unconfirmed reports, but reports nonetheless that seem to have pretty good authenticity to them. Particularly in the Luhansk Oblast, though, that hasn't been confirmed either, so we put it here in the Donbass in general. Russian occupational forces have brought the same fear and terror their German counterparts did during the occupation of Europe in the 40s, murdering civilians and using them as a public example. Retributions and senseless bloodshed in a world in which we said never forget allow once again for such terrible things to happen. These are photos, and we're not showing them here on stream, but these are photos that have been posted over the last 72 hours of publicly executed by hanging of Ukrainian civilians with signs posted around their necks. Very much Nazi Gestapo-like with how they handled the occupations in places such as Italy and France and Belgium. That is so nothing has been confirmed. Sergei Haida, who is the head of the Luhansk Regional Military Administration, he heard that this was posted stating that it was from the region or from the Luhansk region in the occupied zone. And he said, be careful. This hasn't been verified yet. And we're going to say the same thing. This isn't confirmed or verified yet by any official source. But the evidence certainly is there. And it's very much, based off of my experience, it's very much accurate to how they would react to this, or how the human body would react to this. It's really hard to look at. So if you want to look at it, you can get the map on our website or off of the Discord. But I don't encourage it if you aren't mentally prepared to see that kind of stuff. But if you've seen photos from the 40s during the occupation by Nazi Germany in places throughout Europe and how they handled civilian populations and retributions, it definitely has the exact same vibe. It has that kind of feeling to it, and it's very difficult to... This war is a conglomeration of everything that has come before it. It really is, and this is the dark... This is the very dark sector of this. And this does not... we do not put it past here on the channel. Based off of what we've seen... Keep in mind, as a viewer, if you watch the channel, you are seeing 10 to 25% of what's out there from our sources. A very, very large majority of it is extremely graphic. It's extremely graphic and very difficult to watch and look at, especially on a consistent basis, which is why we take so many breaks. And from what we've seen, this is... and definitely in line with what has been confirmed Russian activities. This definitely fits within that realm. This definitely fits in things that we have personally seen through different evidence from different sources that we are unable to show on stream of this kind of activity, and it definitely falls in line with that. So while not officially confirmed, this definitely has a very good, solid case and very solid evidence to go behind it. And so at this point, we're going to go ahead and say that it is very likely that it has been reported that Russians are doing this while unconfirmed at this time. Unfortunately, as we move up here, this is in Novosofivka, which is here in the Zaporizhia region, just outside of the city of Zaporizhia. Unfortunately, 2 people are dead and 3 are injured. Quote, Russian aggressors fired missiles at the village of Novosofivka on the Zaporizhia region on December the 5th. Several private houses were destroyed, 2 citizens were killed, and 3 people were injured, including a baby. And that's coming from Kirilo Timoshenko, who's the deputy head of the president's office. And jumping over into Nikopol. Nikopol was shelled once again. Struck at least 4 separate communities in Nikopol in the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. It damaged civilian residential infrastructure, but there were no immediate reports of any casualties. You do see some of that. This is coming from the official Twitter of the National Police of Ukraine. Coming out of Kryvyi Rih. Kryvyi Rih was also shelled here in the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Quote, at night on December the 5th, Russian occupiers shelled the city of Kryvyi Rih in the Dnipropetrovsk region. A workshop of an industrial enterprise was destroyed. 1 worker was killed and 3 people were injured and hospitalized in moderate condition. Coming from the press service of the Dnipropetrovsk Regional Military Administration. Down here in Kherson, now I saw this, especially in discussions on Twitter, or on our Discord, and there were certain things that people were saying of a possible bridgehead having been established and flags being planted on the other side of the river, and we have some confirmation on that, or at least some what appears to be confirmation on at least part of that. So the whole thing is that what we're seeing here is that the Ukrainians have not established a bridgehead, as has been suggested in some places that I have seen, including on our Discord. Just a lot of talk about them possibly pushing, and there's not a whole lot of reason to do so. And some people have given arguments for both sides. But what we do know is that Ukraine has placed flags on the opposite bank of the Dnipro River. We do know that has happened. They have crossed the river. Now, there seems to be, from the information from the vast amount of information that we have found, there's no credible evidence that Ukraine, despite early reports of having crossed the Dnipro shortly after the fall of Kherson, we do not see anything that supports that they have actually crossed the Dnipro River. There's a lot of footage that came out. A lot of people were talking about, like, here they had taken it back in this national forest, or this national park over here on the small peninsula. There's, there's videos of them crossing over of conducting amphibious operations. It was a very well filmed video. I think it was much more a propaganda purpose and recruiting effort purpose than it was any actual military operations. But we do know that this has happened, that they have crossed the Dnipro and they have planted a flag, more to antagonize the enemy. But really, the only combat action we're seeing from either the Russians or the Ukrainians is the Russians in defensive positions, the most provocative of which is over in Novokakhovka, at the Novokakhovka dam, a hydroelectric site, which is right here. This is the most provocative position for the Russians, while Ukrainian forces have had small skirmishes against Russian troops on the opposite side of the river from across the Antonovsky Bridge and shooting across the river. Now the Ukrainians have gone across, and it appears that in this general vicinity, they have actually put up a flag on the opposite side of the river. And we do have that footage for you here. So it's a rather long video, but they do cross the Dnipro River. You can see they put up a flag on one of the cranes. So nothing crazy, not like they're just like landing a whole lot, but you know, it does take a lot of guys to do this, to provide the security to do it and everything else. But they want to have a flag on the opposite bank of the river. So, but as you can see, no huge offensive operations, no huge offensive military operations, just very small scale, not very kinetic action involved stuff of just wanting to put our flag on the other side, antagonize the enemy a little bit, show them that we are crossing over, that general sort of thing, not really actually, you know, doing a whole lot of actual military, not a whole lot of militarily significant stuff. So they're just talking about the flag on the opposite side of the river. Say, as you can see, not a huge, they didn't cross a huge amount of land. It was very short distance, right over there, climb it, put a flag up, come back. And as you can see, they're sitting on the docks with like little to no equipment on the edge, just talking about it. So obviously not a very kinetic section, not extremely dangerous by comparison of other sectors. We jump over here and into Odessa as we begin to wrap up the Ukraine segment of the night. And we see a grain initiative update. Quote, over the past 2 days, 9 more ships left Ukrainian ports Odessa, Chernomorsk, and Privdeni through the grain corridor. 336,000 tons of Ukrainian agricultural products are on board, heading to countries in Europe, Asia, and Africa, end quote. That's coming from the Ministry of Infrastructure of Ukraine. And that actually wraps up everything happening inside of the country of Ukraine for the night, but that's not everything happening in the world, as I'm sure you can already tell. There's a ton of other stuff happening all throughout the world to cover, but most of it does deal with Ukraine, and so we're going to get on with the international section of the news. And we jump over here and into Moldova. Specifically, over here, this is in the village of Bruseni. This is on the border with Ukraine. And it appears that a Dud missile ended up landing in Bruseni. This is a missile that likely was fired by Ukraine across the border on accident as it was attempting to shoot down missiles that were incoming from today's continual bombardment by cruise missiles. Once again, we see that it has poured across. It has poured across the forces, you know, it's poured across the border here into another country once again. And we actually do have photos coming from the site here. It appears to be, to my best understanding, this is an S-300. They said that the police are on scene and the investigation is ongoing. But when it comes to conflicts of this scale, especially, it's only a matter of time before things boil over, at least incidentally or accidentally, into other places, as what we saw in Poland and probably what we see here in Moldova. Jumping up into Belarus, the buildup does continue. The flow of equipment between Russia and Belarus continues, whether it's going into Russia to support their efforts from Belarusian stockpiles or whether it's coming to Russia to build up military forces inside of Belarus. It really doesn't seem to matter. Either way, there are troops both incoming and outgoing, equipment incoming and outgoing from Belarus and Russia to each other. And this is because there's fears right now that Belarus could decide to enter the war properly on Putin's side. And that would actually open up a front onto the northern sector of a combined Belarusian and Russian force. Now, this is a fear that's been stemmed for a long time, and it's likely that Belarus is only biding its time until it does, in fact, enter the war properly. But as of yet, it has not. But the provocations are there, and it appears that the buildup is happening, however, slowly. In response, there are Ukrainian units, military units, that are prepared and are staged in certain parts of the northern areas, the northern sectors, in order to counter a possible engagement by Belarus. And most of the time, this is possibly where a lot of Ukrainian forces, that when they are rotated off of the front lines in the Donbass, they're brought to the rear and likely brought to one of these staging areas in order to be there in order to rest, refit, do some training, get some supplies, nice showers, hot beds, that kind of stuff, but also to be there in the event that Russia and Belarus decides to enter the war properly and invade from the north again, so that they can actually be forces there to stop them. But we can see some of that movement here. A couple of videos came out today. I just pulled one as they're all very similar. This is just military equipment that's being funneled around inside of Belarus via its rail system. You see extensive amounts of military equipment being moved. Of course, being flatbed rail car as per usual. And we begin to move inside of Russia, where there's been several major developments over the last few days. First of all, we get with some of the administrative stuff coming out of Moscow. Putin ended up signing new laws into action. The first law, rallies are now prohibited in government buildings, universities, schools, hospitals, airports, and ports, at train stations, near churches, and life support facilities. If you want to protest, essentially, you need to go to a field. 2. The promotion of non-traditional sexual relations and transgender transition is prohibited. The new ban equates homosexuality with pedophilia and introduces enormous fines for distributing any kind of queer content. So, obviously, huge step backs within the LGBTQ plus community inside of Russia, which is famous for persecuting them. Rooster Fontaine says, if Belarus enters the war, you think NATO would bomb Belarus? NATO is a defensive alliance, meaning that no country would be supported in a unilateral mission to engage the country of Belarus. Meaning that if one country was to bomb Belarus, the other countries wouldn't support it militarily. And therefore, if Belarus engaged back, they couldn't call Article 5. And that is the keystone of the NATO alliance, is that Article 5 intervention. There are certain times in which NATO imposes a joint no-fly mission, or which is really the extent of most of their military effects, except for post 9/11, when Article 5 was declared in response to the 9/11 attacks. And so... And it justifiably so. I mean, 30,000 people were just immediately vaporized, essentially, inside of the World Trade Centers by terrorist organizations, which everyone had known about for quite an extensive amount of time. So that was the only time Article 5 has ever been triggered, to my knowledge. But NATO... so Sci-Fi puts it best. NATO wouldn't, but Poland might. And that is actually a pretty good chance. Poland is the country foaming at the mouth and barking at the end of its leash to have an excuse. Everyone joking or semi-jokingly, but very nervously, made the joke that because a missile accidentally landed in Polish territory, that Poland was about to unleash the wolves upon Belarus and Russia, just because they wanted the excuse. But the reality is very different. We do see quite a buildup there is a slight buildup of Russian and Belarusian military forces on the border with NATO, especially with Poland, who would be the most aggressive country in the forefront. But Poland is very close with this. They are very much... their military is on especially high alert. But Poland also has taken in the majority of the refugees. They basically are the staging base for all the support for Ukraine. And they are really... Poland does a lot. Poland deserves an entire segment dedicated to how much they do for this and to help Ukraine. But Poland is definitely the one country I can see just saying, screw it, let's go. And they've kind of hinted that it might be the possibility that they would, should Belarus enter. They have hinted at different possibilities of how they would respond. There is a little bit of good news out of Moscow, surprisingly, is that Russia's foreign ministry did confirm negotiations with the IAEA, or the International Atomic Energy Agency, in order to create a safety zone around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. At the same time, Russia is stressing that it will not give control over to the station to any other party. So they're saying that they will not allow any other party to control the nuclear power station. So it's kind of a give and take, but they are trying to create a safety security zone around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in order to prevent a nuclear meltdown as a result of shelling or further basically nuclear issues, nuclear threats if it is shelled and damaged. Coming from the Tula region, the USSR has been calling. The regional government has begun to process the printing food coupons. Judging by the pictures, the coupons are printed for meat and meat products, dairy, milk and dairy products, fish and fish products, as well as edible salt. Coupons were a widespread Soviet tactic to ration the civilian population. Rationing in the Soviet Union was introduced twice since its creation, both instances during periods of economic hardship, such as the perestroika, which is the restructuring. And coming to you straight from Russia, this is the tulapressa.ru. There you guys go. Up here in Ryazan, there's a huge development. There's a massive explosion, or a massive set of explosions, which ended up rocking this Russian airbase. This is the Diaghilevo airbase here in the Ryazan Oblast. Multiple explosions rocked the installation, damaging several vehicles and aircraft. It's unclear what the cause was at the base, but it does lie very deep within Russia, which makes it relatively inaccessible by reach of Ukrainian weapon systems. One possibility is internal partisan activity, as the cracks kind of continue to form. The discontent with the current regime in Russia does continue on the rise. This is satellite footage. You can see the detonation there and the damage to the aircraft surrounding it. It does appear that a fuel truck ended up detonating, and it did damage the aircraft. By the way, who still has tail guns on their aircraft? The B-52 was built with a tail gun because at the time it was still reasonable to have one. But we removed it. And it was also a minigun at the time. Coming down here, this is very kind of eerie. This is out of Penza, out of the Penza Oblast. And this isn't creepy at all. This is once again a good example of what you can call fanaticism. That is excessive single-minded zeal it's an adjective. That's what fanatical means. Fanaticism is to be fanatical. And that's what we see here. We saw that with the woman that was calling on a strike on Washington, D.C., while in complete Soviet garb and just peppered with Soviet stuff everywhere. And we see that here. This is two screw girls. So this man was killed in Ukraine. He went to this high school reportedly, and now there are two girls in black who are now standing watch over his plaque at his school with AK-47s. This is called fanaticism. Yes, that is a thing. Coming out over by Saratov, large explosions also rocked Engels Air Base. Engels is here, just outside of Saratov, just across the river. the Volga River specifically. And this airbase, it so far, multiple aircraft have been indicated to be damaged, and it is reported that it was a drone strike. It has been reported that it possibly Ukrainian, but Ukraine, our understanding is they don't have the capability to launch a drone strike this deep into Russian territory. But these are the bases that are housing the bombers reportedly going to be attacking Ukraine in the widespread missile strike. Hence why they said the missile strike couldn't have been larger, because because several of their aircraft were actually damaged and were unable to fly the mission. But you can see that here. So this is coming from an apartment building, and it says 19 at 42 seconds. So at 15 seconds, you hear something passing overhead. And then he says at 42 seconds, so 42 seconds, if you watch here in the backdrop, you can see the light from the explosion. And then 19 seconds later, putting it at 6.2 kilometers, speed of sound. So that is the explosion coming from Engels, the city, or sorry, from Saratov. And then this is coming from just outside the base itself. So as you can see, obviously certain things are currently, so as you can see, kind of devastating explosion, but not a lot of clarity as to what exactly happened. So hopefully we'll get some more information later, but that is kind of the situation from the two air bases that had detonations occur at them over the last few days. So it is a big deal. But we don't have a lot of information, and information is always going to be very limited on this. But very large explosions were catastrophic in many cases and actually impacted their ability to launch the strikes today by a significant number. Up here in Kazan, I love my dad is what was written on a poster by a woman who was fined 30,000 rubles, or $670 USD fine for discrediting the army of the Russian Federation and hosting an unauthorized protest. Her sign says, "I love my dad." And if that's not sickening enough for you, then coming from Astrakhan, here in the Astrakhan Oblast, the bodies of 60 mutilated dogs were found. Animal rights activists have discovered the bodies of dogs with gouged out eyes, cut off noses, paws, and genitals at a cattle cemetery near Astrakhan. Some of the dogs died of starvation. 2 were found in serious condition on site. 1 died later at a vet clinic. An animal rights group believes that the government-funded Eco Shelter is behind the gruesome scene. The shelter, opened in 2021, was supposed to capture, sterilize, and vaccinate stray dogs and then release them. It was opened by an ex-deputy of the Astrakhan region who received government funding of 80 million rubles or $1.32 million USD for his pet project. His personal vehicle was seen on surveillance cameras near the cattle cemetery. It is kind of brutal footage, so we're not going to be showing that on stream. And finally, coming from Yekaterinburg here in Sverdlovsk Oblast, Russian insurgents from the Boak group set cars marked with Z's on fire. The Boak is an abbreviation for Combat Organization of the Anarcho-Communists, who have been causing trouble by attacking government facilities, rail tracks, and now cars. Here's some of the cars that they ended up setting on fire. Ah, yes, Siberia. You can see they're, of course, tagging the vehicles. Tim Up says, could those be related to the embassy packages? More than likely not, because the Boak group is very much against the Russian government that's currently in power, and it does not seem as though they would be anti-Ukrainian, because the Ukrainians are really beating their government to a pulp right now. But it does not seem like they're the ones who would be behind the embassy package. They are an insurgency group. They are an insurgency group. But they're against their own government. It doesn't make a good cause to screw with other people's governments too, generally speaking. The motivational ideology, just outside of other than Russia and Ukraine are at war, and that there's a lot of NATO assistance, there doesn't appear to be a lot of connection there. There's not a lot of motivation other than their countries being at war that would push them to this. They seem much more directed at their own government, to the point that they're sabotaging their own military's war effort against Ukraine. Seems counterintuitive. Here's some of the work that they're doing to the rail here, which like I said, most of Russia's heavy military equipment is moved via rail. So this definitely is especially devastating, and we see the Boak group. This is not the first time. They also did it in the Bryansk Oblast as well. Take a look. Nice, quick updates. Tim Up says, "Oh, sorry, I mean that dog mutilations. It's possible, but probably. It's possible. The gouged eyes definitely seem like definitely fit that narrative, considering many of the packages that had eyes in them, dog eyes. So it definitely would fit that, and there definitely would be a source for it. Directly, based off of the evidence that I have and considering the precedents that were set, I personally, and this is my opinion, and this does not have a lot of supportive evidence, but from my experience in the methodology and mentality of Yevgeny Prigozhin in the Wagner Group, that seems very much like something that the Wagner Group would be doing. Now, I do believe that there's an easy way that being government officials, both of them, I believe that they would be able to, or being well connected in general, that if he probably knows this deputy in Astrakhan and would probably and could have probably sourced them from him, knowing what he was doing, probably having some good dirt on him too. But I do not believe that the purpose was to do that. In the end, I think he was just funneling the money for himself, which is not unheard of. Corruption is horrendous inside of Russia. But I believe it could have turned into a source for him. for Yevgeny Prigozhin, who I believe the Wagner Group are the ones I believe that are behind that, because they have plausible deniability to do something that would make a large impact like that. Look no further than Syria before you want to dive into that. Jump over here into Poland, where we see that more U.S. equipment arrives. So more U.S. equipment, including tanks, the M1, A1A2 Abrams ended up arriving, as well as a multitude of recovery vehicles and all the supportive equipment needed for mechanized operations have arrived in Poland as military buildup continues here inside of Europe as the tensions continue to mount amid the war in Ukraine. So there you guys go. That is the famous Abrams main battle tank. And that has arrived in Europe to screw somebody's day up. If things are necessary, if it is required. Coming from Czechia. So the first Ukrainian recruits have arrived in Czechia and are already receiving training. The first group of Ukrainian military recruits arrived in Czechia to receive military training. Similar to the training that their fellow recruits are also receiving in the United Kingdom, Czechia will provide a safe and secure place for new Ukrainian military recruits to learn and hone their skills in combat before being shipped back to the front lines. And we see some of this is coming from militaryland.net, which is an OSINT source, open source intelligence. And you see them doing very basic things, learning, hip pocket classes, of course. This is learning how to throw hand grenades, a very, very important skill. Machine gunnery, also extremely important. Good machine gunnery can change the tide of a battle. RPGs, yeah, the basics. But it's also been confirmed by the General Staff of Ukraine via their official Twitter as well. So awesome to see additional training ongoing here. So awesome to hear from Czechia. And then a big surprise from a very tiny country. The small but mighty country of Luxembourg. Tucked right here between Belgium, France, and Germany. Not a whole lot of people ever talk about Luxembourg. It's a relatively small country, not too much to talk about. Really consists of just the capital city, Luxembourg, and some very small hamlets in between. But Luxembourg is going to provide Ukraine with whatever it can. Tiny Luxembourg actually has donated 16% of their total defense budget for this year to Ukraine in equipment. So Luxembourg made the monumental decision to provide Ukraine with whatever it can so it can continue the fight against the Russian onslaught. In total, the Grand Duchy provided Ukraine with military equipment totaling 16% of their defense budget. Luxembourg's defense budget was last publicly released at $490 million USD, and that was in fiscal year 2020. In total, they have provided roughly, based off of that figure, $78.4 million USD in assistance, which for a very small country, like I said, that is a huge, because they're not even close to what, they don't spend even $1 billion on their defense budget in total. They don't need to because they're not a huge country, but they don't have a lot allocated to it. So it is quite an extensive amount for what they have. It's not about who has this biggest dollar amount all the time. It's about who's providing. Some countries have given up their entire air force to support Ukraine. I mean, that says a lot about support. and willingness to support. And we can say the same for Luxembourg. Small but mighty in heart. That's certainly true. This is coming from the ministry, from the General Staff of Ukraine as well. They found their official Twitter for Luxembourg, and they said that 30th anniversary between the relations between the two of them, and they said they gave 75 million euros worth, and that's 16% of our 2022 defense budget, which is right in there. So it's about correct. Those numbers are about correct. And you can see some of these Humvees, the Luxembourg Humvees, are actually going over to Ukraine right now. So fantastic to hear from tiny Luxembourg. Always happy to see even the small countries pitching in with whatever they can. Jump down here and into Turkey, where he was allowed to travel. Are you kidding me? This is Pushilin, who is the head of the DPR. He's the head of the Russian-backed terrorists. This is leaked footage that came out from this. This was this summer. So while he was running, while he was going to Russia to do administrative work, and while his, comrades were being killed en masse after being forcefully conscripted by the Russians, he was partying in Turkey. Oh, how things never change in Russia. Huh. Sounds like someone probably was getting out of Dodge when they could. And that brings us into the Middle East, where we have several different developments. Our first development for the Middle East comes out of Syria, of course. And this is coming out specifically out of the Asawada governorate here in Syria. This is in the southern part. And protesters ended up storming and setting fire to the governor's office here in Asawada. A policeman and at least one other person were killed in the southern Syria of Suwaida as protesters stormed the government building over worsening economic conditions. The protesters chanted "overthrow the regime" and were seen taking down the Assad posters and burning the Russian flag, as Russia does heavily back the Assad regime and are honestly the only reason he's still in power. This is coming from Reuters. You see them burning the Russian flag here. As you can see, rather upset, and I would be too. Keep in mind, most of in the south, thanks to the Russians, Assad was able to basically claw his way back in power, and was able to, supported very heavily by the Russian forces, able to secure the south. But those sentiments are definitely on the rise, especially as Russian forces are being cannibalized from their operational command south here in Syria in order to be brought into the war in Ukraine, and they are significantly weakened in their combat power and their dedication to the country of Syria and the operations ongoing there. Big news coming out of Iran is Iran has announced the plans to disband the morality police. Though some media outlets claim that it has been disbanded, this has proven to be false by the locals. Announcement is a clear tactic to try and slow down the protests. And today, for the first time since 1979, during the Iranian Revolution, the Isfahan Bazaar is on a strike. Starting today, there will be a 3-day strike among all work sectors. The country stands still. It's pretty big news coming out of there. Coming out of northern Afghanistan, some rather graphic footage came out of floggings. The Afghan Supreme Court announced on Saturday that 19 men and women had been publicly flogged as judicial punishment in Talquan in the Tajar province. Each of them received 39 lashes. The defendants were charged with adultery, leaving their father's or husband's home with another man, and theft in a ceremony held a week ago in Talquan. Now, we do have video footage of the public flogging, but we decided to leave it as an 18-plus video footage, as it can get rather... flogging is not as non-graphic as you may believe. Whips hurt, and they do cut pretty badly. We jump over here into China, where easing a lockdown in areas are happening following protests. Several major cities and provinces, Zhejiang, Jingji, Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, Shenyang of the Liaoning province have announced release of mandatory COVID-19 testing screenings, with exceptions in designated high-risk areas such as elderly daycare, healthcare facilities, elementary schools, indoor dinings, etc. Testing booths were seen being removed. However, for places which require the test, there were reportedly longer lines for testing. Civilians were seen queuing for testing in the snow. You see as those booths are being removed, you can see them queuing up even in the snow there. Look at these mandatory testing lines. This is the queue for it. What's it like to have no freedom and live in a communist country? Well, you stood in line for 18 hours to get a COVID test in the snow. And that's after you were, starving to death in the middle of a lockdown, and you were tied inside of your own home, and you got to watch your neighbors burn alive. Yep, that's what it's like to live in a communist country. A woman living in Turkey learned of the death of her mother and her siblings through social media in the Urumqi fire. There's been no confirmation of deaths from the government, and there is an article on that regarding from BBC. The Chinese government released an official death toll of 10. It's upwards of over 40 is what is believed. Down in Djibouti, always a fun nation to say, specifically coming from the port here just outside Djibouti, which is in Doralay, the first ship from the Grain from Ukraine initiative has arrived. This ship set sail in middle to late last month, and this is the Nordvind, which set sail carrying 25,000 tons of wheat. It has arrived in port, and it is currently being offloaded with its final destination of the cargo headed to Ethiopia, where it is very, very badly needed at this point in time. So this is coming from the official Twitter of President Zelensky of the Nordvind actually arriving there in port very much late tonight. Always nice to see that initiative taking place and humanitarian efforts going on. Coming out of East Africa, the World Vision situation has given a report. World Vision has given a situation report. World Vision is responding to the impact of hunger in 7 countries across East Africa and requires $181 million USD to reach 5 million people, including 2.7 million children, by April 2023. There are still roughly 45 million, or a 23% gap in funding. Since April 2021, World Vision has reached more than 7.7 million people, including 4.2 million children. In these 7 countries alone, there is an estimated that there is 47.5 million people who are acutely food insecure. Coming from Malawi, there's an expansion of access to the malaria vaccine. The government of Malawi launched an expanded delivery for the first malaria vaccine, RTS-SAS101, or RTSS, last month. This is currently the first ever large-scale vaccination campaign against malaria. Early trials showed about 30% of the 5 to 17 months old who received the vaccine were protected. However, children under 5 account for about 80% of malaria deaths in Africa. The National Malaria Control Program manager stated that this new immunization campaign will ensure that all children under 5, including those living in the most remote areas, are covered. You know, I have more information. You can go to BBC, and they have an article on this, as well as the WHO. Coming from the island of Madagascar, off of the east coast of Africa, an area that we really don't get to talk about, or I don't think we've talked about at all so far on the channel. Unfortunately, the news is rather bleak there as well, as climate change has drastically impacted Madagascar as it has the rest of the region. By December of 2021, more than 1.6 million people of South Madagascar were estimated to be suffering from high levels of food insecurity. The worst drought in 40 years triggered a drastic decline in food production. The United Nations University put together 5 facts of the current crisis. 1. Health impacts: livelihood loss, displacement, and loss of life are the result of food insecurity. 2. The continued legacy of colonialism contributed to the present-day disaster. Colonial forces were responsible for cutting down as many as 4 million hectares of forest throughout Madagascar. Undervaluing environmental costs of undervaluing environmental costs of Madagascar's natural resources can be a costly mistake. Madagascar covers less than 1% of our surface, and it hosts more than 5% of all known plants and animals. 4. Innovation and secured livelihoods go hand in hand in reducing disaster risk. And 5. Solutions are a package deal. You either do them all or you do none of them. If you would like more information, ReliefWeb.International has an entire report released on that. And that allows us to come over here into North America, where we have our last few updates. The first one coming from the United Nations headquarters, where we see that it was on December 3rd, it was International Day of Persons with Disabilities. December 3rd is the International Day of Persons with Disabilities, which has been celebrated internationally since 1992. The observance this year is going to include the overarching theme of innovation and transformative solutions for inclusive development, covering the 3 main topics: innovation for disability inclusive development and employment, or SDG 8, innovation for disability inclusive development and reducing inequality, SDG 10, and innovation for disability inclusion development, in period. And we can take a look at that here. This is coming from the United Nations. And that is coming from the United Nations. Now, something that blew my mind, because I actually didn't know this. So, I'm kind of ashamed, I know. But one of my all-time favorite songs, and I'm not a big... I don't celebrate Christmas very often. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I should I should wait there. So I got ahead of myself. I apologize. I'm really excited for the point that comes after this. But before we get to that, a pretty big thing. Iran state-backed hacking compromised accounts of high-profile individuals. In October of 2022, Human Rights Watch staff received suspicious WhatsApp messages inviting the staff to attend a conference on behalf of a think tank. A joint investigation conducted by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International Security Lab found that the phishing links directed to the target to a fake login page that captured the user's email, password, and authentication. 18 high-profile activists, journalists, researchers, academics, diplomats, and politicians who are working on Middle East issues were identified as targets. On November 23rd, 2022, a second Human Rights Watch staff received the exact same phishing message from the same number. The attackers gained access to emails, cloud storage drives, calendars, and contacts of 3 targets whose accounts were compromised, and also performed a Google takeout using a service that exports data from the core and additional services of a Google account. The investigation contributed to the phishing attack to APT42, referred to as Charming Kitten, an entity that's affiliated with the Iranian government. The Human Rights Watch called for better protection for people who are working on Middle East issues. Once again, Iran putting as many fingers into the pie as they physically can. And now we get to the uplifting stuff. So every single day here on the channel, we try and end the night on an interesting or a good note. And we have one that is probably my favorite point of the night, because I learned something I didn't know. And I am kind of embarrassed about it. So at Carnegie Hall, there is an event being hosted called the Notes of Ukraine, and it's about different music. But today, so the 4th, so yesterday, was the 100th anniversary of the creation of what we here in the West would know as Carol of the Bells, but it's actually Ukrainian. So it's called Shadrik, and it's actually a New Year's folk song in Ukrainian, and the music was written down by a Ukrainian composer, who it was then taken by the Russians and brought to the United States, where an Englishman liked it so much on Broadway that he took it for his own and wrote lyrics to it. Because, you know, as imperialists, everyone stole everything else from somebody. So that the traditional way and the modern way of singing Carol of the Bells, which is my all-time, I don't celebrate Christmas very much, but it is my hands down favorite carol. Especially I like Sarajevo, which I understand it's kind of taboo to say the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, considering they are Russian, but it speaks a lot considering when you know what the point of that song is and the situation in the Baltics at the time. It's very fitting when you consider what's happening in Ukraine right now. But Carol of the Bells, I think, is a very impactful song. And I think it's really cool because I've now listened to that version much more than the actual Carol of the Bells. I actually like the Ukrainian original version much better than Carol of the Bells, personally. But coming from Notes from Ukraine, you see coming from the Kiev Independent, once again at the Carnegie Hall. And this is the Carol of the Bells segment, posted by Ukraine. So this is Carol of the Bells done, well, no other but the proper way. Honestly, I prefer the original much better. I prefer the actual Shidreek much better. But I really like the fact that they ended up mixing the two. But you can actually watch, so you can actually go here. This is their official website. Highly recommend that you go and check it out, and you can donate to it. And then they also went to Carnegie Hall once again. But very, very beautiful. So, and next we jump down here. This is to the Goddard Space Flight Center for NASA out of Goddard, Maryland. And this is Titan from the Webb telescope, the James Webb telescope, the newest one that we've put into space that has given us some amazing photos so far. Definitely even an improvement over the famous Hubble telescope, which has really opened our eyes to the universe around us. Scientists study Titan, Saturn's moon, through the Webb's infrared vision. The view on the left uses a filter sensitive to Titan's lower atmosphere. The bright spots are prominent clouds in the northern hemisphere. On the right is a composite image labeled Kraken Mar is hypothesized and to be a methane sea. Bellet is composed of a dark-colored sand dunes. Titan is the only moon in the solar system with dense atmosphere and the only planetary body other than Earth that currently has rivers, lakes, and seas. Unlike Earth, the liquid on Titan's surface is composed of hydrocarbons, including methane and ethane, not water. So this is Titan. Very cool. So you can see the different clouds that are popping up. So cloud A, cloud B, atmosphere K is down here around the pole. And then you can see here, cloud A, cloud B, and then you can see the atmosphere K is down here around this pole. You can also see Kraken Mar right here. So Kraken Mar is thought to be a methane sea. Bellet, which is right here. It's dark colored sand dunes. And this is a Diri is a bright albedo feature. Right here. So still very difficult to see, but these are also incredibly far away, but very amazing photos nonetheless. It really gives us a lot more of an insight as to how this planet works, what it looks like underneath the dense clouds and atmosphere around the planet, and really gives an insight into the inner workings of that. And also it's just kind of cool to look at and see something that in certain visual lights, as there's a wide spectrum of what they're using there, but in certain visual ways that kind of almost looks like kind of like an Earth, even though it definitely is not. It kind of looks like an Earth from a distance in the way that they portray that. So it's pretty cool, and it's pretty cool that it has very similar features to Earth, even if they are absolutely devastatingly toxic, and there's no way, shape, or form that life should ever survive on that planet. It's kind of cool that it exists in a very similar fashion, but it's so similar yet so different from our very own planet. But with that is actually everything in the world tonight, at least that we are going to be covering on the stream here. Now, I understand this is a very long stream. I hope that you guys found it informative. This is the last stream before we take a break. We will not be back until Wednesday. Once again, let me pull up my calendar. Wednesday the 14th will be the next stream that we will be doing live. We are going on vacation. At least I am going on vacation and going to be taking care of everything and resting and relaxing a little bit. I haven't taken a vacation from work all year. So I hope that you guys remain safe, that you and your families remain safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. There is a ton of stuff that has happened, and a lot of people are affected by it. The whole point of this channel is to inform you and to give you an opportunity to give back, to help people affected by these situations. So please, I always encourage you to please go into the video description and check out those wonderful organizations below. 80% or more of their donations go directly to their programs and go directly to helping people. And you can help put some good back into this world. And if you can't give a lot, give a little. And if you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. Then help us grow our impact. Share this amongst your friends, your family, your communities. Give us that like and subscribe. As much as I hate to ask for it, it does help the channel immensely, and it really helps us expand our outreach, and that brings more people here. And the more people that are here, the more of an impact we'll have, and the more lives we can improve all throughout the world. And so with that, my name is Paul from the New News. Please be safe. I am looking forward to hopefully seeing all of you back for a nice, very long week in review across the entire globe coming on Wednesday night. Wednesday, December the 14th at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central. In the meantime, please be safe, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye now.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Відстріляно в новах і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шлепуємо. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Відстріляно в новах і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям с кирпичом даже танки не почем. Вам не взять нас и за 100 000 лет. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Відстріляно в новах і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО.
Mr. Putin, on behalf of all our guys, no one's scared of your nuclear device. You can take your double lemon, shove it up your wrinkled bum. Oh, we'll come and help you fit it in your skull.
Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Відстріляно в новах і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Відстріляно в новах і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Russian soldiers going